Hello. To be honest with you, what that really means is almost certainly the top two are Princess Mononoke and It's a Wonderful Life. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Thank you for spoiling it, Anthony. Welcome to another Sunday Superversive live stream. I am your host, Benjamin Wheeler, and today uh, we've had a lot of things going on for us this week. Uh, so many changes, changes. So we're just gonna take it easy, talk about movies we like, and have some more reasonable content next week. Anthony, how are you doing today?
Fantastic, but Ben is not kidding. It's not that everything has been bad. It has not been bad. It's
It's not
just
been
been
bad.
a lot. Uh, a
Oh,
lot.
it's gonna be bad for some people, but
But
not
people
me,
we don't like.
not
So,
many
yeah.
anymore.
But
Uh,
people we don't like.
exactly. Uh, though do pray for me. I'm considering some changes in career and so on and so forth, but we'll see how that goes. And this is not relevant to our live stream. It is well known that we are very much into popular culture, and I know that my tastes in movie are pretty basic. Uh, quite frankly, looking at this, the movies I actually would like sit down and enjoy again without a gun to my head. Uh, it's actually a pretty basic list. I feel like I should start sucking down pumpkin spice. That's how basic this is. I don't know how do you feel, Anthony?
I love pumpkin spice.
Ugh, ugh. I'm learning new things about Anthony today. I don't know if I like
I
it.
hate to, look, people want to pretend they don't like pumpkin spice because it's like a basic white girl thing. Embrace it. It's delicious.
I will. All right. So let's talk about our top tens. Well, let's first talk about honorable mentions. These are movies that I enjoy quite a bit and will watch again, but I can't really say that they're like movies I'd go out of my way for. Like I wouldn't enjoy them, multiple times or as many times as I have with my top 10 list. Uh, you have things like Hellraiser, Halloween, Day After Tomorrow, Much Ado About Nothing, Alien, Batman Beyond, Return of the Joker, Pokemon the first movie, Holes, Hook, Hidalgo, The Northman. These are all movies I've seen across my life. Some, like The Northman, are pretty recent, but others have been around since my childhood. And I really do enjoy them. I don't really have a set taste, though I'm pretty sure fantasy and animation are going to take top spot. I don't know, Anthony. What are your honorable mentions?
Yeah, honorable mentions. I have Interstellar is definitely on the honorable mention list. Serenity goes on the honorable mentions. As I mentioned before the stream, if we did this like 5 or 10 years ago, maybe, uh, Serenity would probably have made the top 10. I still love it, but not quite top 10 material. I don't think. Wrath of Khan, uh, which is a great movie. Not personally resonant enough, I don't think, for to make the top 10, but it's an awesome film. Empire Strikes Back, Indiana Jones, and if I'm gonna name a specific one, Raiders of the Lost Ark. Your Name. Your Name is an extremely moving film that affected me a lot when I watched it, but the plot is just too nonsensical for me to justify putting it in my top 10 ever. It falls apart with like a second of thought, so even though I love that film, I can't do it. And oh yeah, another the last three all I am a as people here probably know by now, I am a huge Hayao Miyazaki fan. I did a whole retrospective in his entire filmography. I love all of his films. Believe it or not, the ones that I rewatched the most are probably Castle in the Sky, Howl's Moving Castle, and Porco Rosso. So they will make the honorable mentions. But those three are not in the top 10. However, a Miyazaki movie is in my top 10. It's just not it's just not one of those three.
I got you. I also have as like almost top tens Pacific Rim and The Cat Returns. Um,
The Cat Returns is a fun movie.
it's a great movie. I love it. It's I know it's not like, in the main core of Ghibli films, but I just enjoy it too much. And Pacific Rim is just fun. You have giant stompy robots beating the tar out of kaiju, and unlike the sequel, there's no John Boyega. Um, the music's there. Guillermo del Toro is at his best. Uh, uh, Stacker Pentecost is one of the coolest names that's ever been put in film. Um, just these great heroic characters, very larger than life. It's just a great time.
Oh,
Uh,
I gotta say, by the way, just to get ideas for this, I'm looking at Cinema Cartography, the channel Cinema Cartography. I like Cinema Cartography. I don't love the channel because I feel like he's a little bit, how do you put this? Snobby, right?
yeah.
Is how I would put it. But I was looking at his top 30 greatest films list just for ideas, and there is a movie in there that I would put in the honorable mentions, and that is The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, which probably has my favorite soundtrack, which is saying a lot, but it is like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is one of those soundtracks that if you think you don't know it, you actually do. You just don't realize that you know it. That's the famous da na 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 wah wah wah. That's The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Uh, and it's Ennio Morricone, who also did another soundtrack on a movie that is in my top 10.
Cool. I guess I'll start with my number 10, and
Yeah.
that's Titan AE. Uh, this was it Don Bluth? I think it was. It was one of the last sort of non-Disney animated films uh, that kind of that stayed out of CGI, even though it used a decent amount of CGI for its space scenes. It's just kind of a great story. You have a guy whose father was a scientist that was supposed to be creating some secret world terraforming project before an energy being race destroyed the planet Earth, and so now he is the key to finding and discovering this secret technology that the energy beings fear. Overall, it's got great characterizations, great intrigue. It's just a very fun movie. I think it got a lot of hate in the day, partially because people say they want serious, like, adventure films, but they don't actually support them in the way that they say they want them. Um, which is always very unfortunate, just because it destroys the momentum of it. Quite frankly, like, I blame consumers for the destruction of, like, serious American cartooning. Like, we could have
Mhm.
had, actual, like, serious stuff like Japan does, things like Invasion America and Titan AE and other things like that. But nobody ever supported it like they should have. They just didn't. It doesn't matter that the movies are pretty good with great characters, with wonderful adventures, decent soundtracks, pretty good animation, all this other things. Like, there are some real laughs in Titan AE. Like, it's got everything you need in the right balance, but it
I'll just
never.
never forget John C. Wright saying that was one of the worst movies he ever saw.
I don't understand that comment. I just don't. Uh,
The plot, according to him, I believe the plot didn't really work.
like, from some of the books of his, especially the Count de Eschaton series, that's rich. But it's like, I don't understand, like the plot's fine. The kid has a genetic map that, once it's activated, goes to a place. It just I don't. It's done. It's been done before by successful products. I don't understand it. uh, like, one of the best scenes is that they're trying to get into a slave pen, and they completely botch it up because the guard is like, wait a minute, Trandarians are supposed to insult you before they start business. It's tradition, practically religious, and you're definitely not a slave. You're clearly military. And it's like, and so they beat him up, and it's like, wow, intelligent guard. It's a great scene. You have pretty great uses of CGI. This is when CGI was going from like Babylon 5 era to, more advanced, Star Wars, Phantom Menace, and all this other stuff era, where you had like really big space battles that weren't practical effects. You know, it's just, I'm frustrated by some of the movies on my top 10. These things I enjoy deeply. Some of them you're going to be like, you actually like that? I'm like, yeah, I like that. I like it more than some actual masterpieces. But the reasoning is that, it's the amount of enjoyment I take from these things. Uh, you know, there was a time in my life when I was collecting like DVDs and stuff like that, and I actually went a fair distance to a spot, found Titan AE, and that's what I bought. The DVD was unfortunately scratched up, and they're like, "Buddy, we sold this to you from the bargain bin. You're not getting a refund." I'm like, "Oh,
FYI, Ben, as we've been having this conversation, I did manage to fill out my list.
thank you. Uh, I appreciate it. What's your top 10, Anthony?"
Number 10 is The Thing. So this is John Carpenter's The Thing. It is technically a remake movie of Howard Hawks' The Thing from Another World, which I have not seen, but I've heard is pretty good in its own right. Uh, for whatever that's worth. So The Thing is definitely the lowest in the top 10 in the sense of like it it certainly makes it, but I don't enjoy it personally as much as the others. Part of the reason for this is that uh it is a great film. For it to make the top 10, they're all great films, right? Uh but part of the reason that's not it's not any higher on this list is honestly because I watched it relatively late in life. Like I watched it for the first time 2 years ago. Uh, and I watched it because around Halloween, every now and then, I get into a mood where I'm like, I haven't watched enough horror movies. I'm gonna look up a good one that's considered to be good and watch it. And The Thing was the one I watched that year, and I was very impressed by it. The plotting, the way that everything is structured, the effects are unbelievable. The acting, it really just all comes together. Uh, but that's the thing though. Like in terms of its influence on me, The Thing is lowest on this list for that reason, right? Like it just hasn't had enough time and hasn't had enough to do in my life to really influence the way I write. And then there's the question of like, is The Thing, a nihilistic film? I don't think it is. But I could see why people would say that it was. To be honest, I don't really think that John Carpenter was thinking of the movie in that way, if that makes sense. But yeah, there's almost not enough to say. The reason it's on this list is that I consider it to be in many ways a perfect movie, right? Like that's what gets it on the list above other things is that I can't think of a single thing in The Thing that I would do differently. And it's such a simple yet complex plot in that you're constantly wondering who is turning into the thing at various points of the movie. And if you pay close enough attention, you can put all of the pieces together, right? Like, it's possible to work it out, but the movie doesn't spell any of this out. And the fact that it doesn't spell any of this out is what heightens the paranoia because you don't have the time, much like the characters don't have the time. You watching it don't have the time to put the pieces together, right? Because you're in there with the characters trying to figure out, okay, so who is the thing? Who is doing this? That and there are just some true horror moments when you see the monster that are just unbelievable, right? Like the when he bites off the arms of one of the character, that's an unbelievable scene. Yeah, lots of things like that. That's yeah. The retrospective is honestly good story, well told. And what puts it in the top 10 is that it does everything that it has to do to be what it is perfectly. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that does. Uh, and I think that's a great explanation. Number 9 is for me is Van Helsing. Now this is a fun movie, absolute
Yes.
roller coaster of an enjoyable time. Uh,
This was one of our first shows, was a discussion on Van Helsing, I believe.
and yeah, oh yeah, I could believe it. I just remembered The Mummy. I also like Brendan Fraser's The Mummy. This is a dual thing. I like
Give it a
campy.
tie.
Was that?
Gonna give it a tie.
Yeah, because it's like, so there's a certain thing with monster movies. All right, vampire movies, mummy movies, werewolf movies, where there's a balance between horror and seriousness and humor. So it's like you have the horror, right? How much do you want to get into that? Now, do you want to make it serious or do you want to make it kind of campy, kind of fun? Van Helsing is, and The Mummy as well, is fun. The Mummy is my standing date movie. It is an absolute great time. Both of them are. Quite frankly, I'd consider it worrying if the woman I'm dating does not enjoy these movies, for the simple reason that they have a spirit to them that is to be enjoyed, not to be necessarily taken seriously. But they also have very good writing, very good direction, very good acting. Like it's just I don't really have flaws for it. I know people complain about Van Helsing. Oh well, there's this, and why is Frankenstein in there? And well, it makes sense. It makes a lot of sense when it comes down to it. The reason why Frankenstein exists is because Dracula has had Dr. Frankenstein experiment to create life from death, so that he can have his children born. Uh, you know, as a parent loves their children and wants to see them born, so too do dead parents love their dead children. Um, and to me, there's never really been a logical problem with any of it. Which I guess,
I agree with you. Yeah, I've never understood the criticism of Van Helsing. It's definitely not in my personal top 10, but it is a perfectly fun, well-made movie. Like, there is nothing wrong with it.
yep, I agree. And it's hard to kind of talk about it because one, it's like Titan AE. I don't really understand the criticism with some of this stuff. Just because it's like, what do you mean that there's a plot problem with this? It seems, perfectly reasonable. At least it seemed perfectly reasonable until you brought up the fact that it wasn't reasonable, et cetera, et cetera. So it's kind of hard to go, hey, you know, these are these are great. I go these are great movies, but then the response is usually, ugh. It's like, what? Am I supposed to like The Godfather? People talking around, subtle character interactions, not a joke to be had. The romance is all disordered. I gotta tolerate, them talking about different sexual stuff. I gotta tolerate looking at
The
crime and vicious.
Godfather is a great movie. I just like. So here's the thing. First off, you grow up in an Italian family, you got to know The Godfather, right? Uh, I've like it's weird.
No
I've seen The
comment.
Godfather in pieces. It's because it's on all the time. I've never actually sat down and watched it like from beginning to end. But
Sure,
I would agree it's a great movie. Like,
sure, but like in
I won't
terms of
fight that.
enjoyment, it's like what I gotta tolerate this. I gotta. It's like recently people have been talking about Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy. Now I've not read Blood Meridian, but I've read parts of it, and the key of Blood Meridian is that it's a flow of thought that is kind of like a movie. The thing is that that flow keeps you from truly, processing all the horrible trauma happening around people. Cormac McCarthy is a master of the English language,
Yeah.
uh, but the thing is,
McCarthy's disturbing, and Blood Meridian is his most disturbing book, and not in a
yeah,
good way.
no,
I
it's
don't really like my problem with Blood Meridian is that there's no point to it.
yep,
Like there's literally no point to it. I
yep,
wouldn't necessarily say the same thing about The Godfather. That doesn't mean you need to like it. You can like whatever you want. I'm just
sure,
like I do think that there's a difference between the two though. Like Blood Meridian is a story about how everything is horrible and, death wins out overall, right? Like, The Godfather is about something. And sure, there is no Christian redemption in The Godfather, but that's because the protagonist of the film rejects it. That's why you have the famous scene at the climax of the movie, right? Where he's getting the child baptized and swearing to renounce the devil in all his works, and that's cut with a montage of him murdering people, right? Like, it's a very famous scene in the film.
Yes.
So there, in a
More of
sense,
it.
there is redemption in The Godfather. The protagonist specifically rejects it.
Sure. And I don't doubt it. It's just, when it comes to, like when it comes to what I put into my mind, it's like I see this stuff, and to me it always seems one step off of, from things like Guro and Grand Guignol and other things like that, where the point is the suffering of your fellow man, often in an erotic context. With these movies like Van Helsing and The Mummy, there is this gore, but there isn't, a sort of presence of this is just evil for evil's sake. Dracula is evil, for his own sake mostly, but at the same time, it's clearly delineated as evil. And while you could say that for Godfather and Blood Meridian, your perspective is from inside the evil, not from the heroic character trying to put down evil. In the end, whatever people might say about The Godfather is like, how many people aren't corrupt? Well, it's a mafia family. Everyone should be somewhat corrupt. I don't think I recall a single honest person on the side of good and law, except for I think one of his sons who wants to be an opera singer. And, personally, I think that's just coded for him being a homosexual, without saying that
That
he's
I
a
don't remember,
homosexual.
and it's possible, but I mean, I don't deny that it's possible. But
Yeah,
so the thing about The Godfather is that it's about like his father, the Al Pacino's father, Marlon Brando's character.
yes,
He got into his business because he was trying to protect his family, and that's what the whole flashback sequence in Godfather Part Two is. He built it into an empire. Now you can question, and you should question, right, the honesty of this, and if you should. But what is also true is that he did not want Al Pacino's character, Michael, right? He did
yes,
not want Michael to follow in his footsteps. He specifically was trying to push him away from it. And
right,
Michael ended up getting so like he knew that it was a difficult, dangerous life. So I guess my point is that while what you're saying is perfectly valid, right? Like it's all true. I can totally understand why that would make you not like it. I would argue that it is not necessarily disordered to like the film. Like there are reasons that you could watch and go, "No, this has something to say that is meaningful."
right,
Right? Like that's all I'm saying.
sure. And there is more meaning in The Godfather than um, something like Grand
Blood
Guignol,
Meridian.
Blood Meridian, certainly. But it's like, there's the reason why it's good is not the same as the reason why, is not the connection between the quality of the message and not. In Blood Meridian, the quality of the book is in how well Cormac McCarthy dances on the rules of the English language and is still incredibly comprehensible, and provides the key of language, which is to impress a thought on to somebody else. That communication, that idea. Every sentence needs to be a thought. Every participle within that sentence needs to be a part of that thought. Every paragraph is a greater thought made up of lesser thoughts, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that Cormac McCarthy does not always produce nihilistic work, so he does a lot,
I
right?
cannot name a
However,
single non-nihilistic work by Cormac
I can.
McCarthy.
I'll give it to you right now. No Country for Old Men is not nihilistic. Uh, I will die on that hill. At the very least, there is one big but subtle change in the Coen Brothers version,
Yeah,
admittedly, but it's not nihilistic. The change, you probably know what I'm talking about, but for those who don't know, so they have the villain Anton Chigurh, right?
yeah,
He flips a coin to the side if he's going to kill you or not. There is a famous scene at the end where they meet like Llewellyn, the protagonist's wife, or one of
Yeah.
the three protagonists. They meet his wife, and he tells her choose. Now, this scene is almost identical, but they make a change. At first, in both the book and the movie, she refuses to choose. And Shiger says they always choose, choose. In the book, she chooses heads or tails and loses the coin flip and he kills her. In the movie, she refuses to choose and
Yeah.
Shiger kills her. This is a major difference that I don't think enough people signal out as a major difference. And in my opinion, the Coen Brothers version is a straight up improvement.
Yeah.
Uh, to the point where I actually wish that that's like what Cormac McCarthy did in the book. However, it is like the only change. Otherwise, it's a very, very direct adaptation.
Sure.
Uh, but the point of the change is that Shiger is a hypocrite, right? Like
Yeah.
that his philosophy was all lie all along. He kills people. He doesn't need to kill anyone. It's not random. He's doing it because he wants to. Like he could just not kill you, even if he doesn't flip the coin,
Right.
right? Like he could just not flip the coin at all. It's all a lie. And the point of that scene is to nail down like Shiger is lying. He is a liar, right?
Yes.
And Shiger comes out of it with his whole philosophy deeply shaken, right? Like he has just seen somebody reject his entire system, call him out on it, and he's forced to kill them. And now everything that he claims that he is false, and he gets
Yep.
hit by a car and dies, right? The being hit by a car can look like nihilistic randomness, but it's not. The
It
reason
isn't.
that's not right. The reason it's not is because Shiger has just been indicated as mortal, right?
Yes.
At that moment. And then finally, you have the real protagonist of the film, who is the old man, who I can't remember his name, but he's played
Tommy
by
Lee
Tommy
Jones.
Lee. Yeah, he's
It'll
played by
serve.
Tommy Lee Jones. Tommy Lee Jones tells you the actual message of No Country for Old Men, which is that he has a dream of his father carrying a torch, and his father hands the torch off to him, and then he wakes up. The idea is that the world is a difficult, dangerous place, but there is a torch, the light of goodness, the light of morality, the light, of life, that needs to be passed on from generation to generation if it's going to survive, and you need to bring it as far as you can, then other people need to pick up that torch. Tommy Lee Jones is the man who has to pick up that torch. So, I would argue, No Country for Old Men is not nihilistic. Is the book nihilistic? Well, maybe. The book does change that scene, and it does significantly change the symbolism of Shigor's death, right? Because
Yes.
if Shigor is correct that everybody chooses, then his death is just to hammer home that, well, I guess, even people like him are going to die eventually. Nothing really matters. But in
Right.
the Coen Brothers version, his death is to point out that Shiger has just been exposed as mortal. He's just as human as anyone else. And he can get hit by a car and die just like you. Right?
But the thing is that like that's the Coen brothers, not Cormac McCarthy.
That's the only change they make, though.
It doesn't
Right?
matter.
Like,
That's a very
everything else
deep
in the
change.
movie. Sure, but the final scene is the same. The one where he has the dream of handing off the torch, that's in both versions. I think the change might have just been to make the theme more clear. I'm not sure if it actually changes the message.
You see, the thing is that like if the change is everyone chooses, and there's no one who refuses, then it doesn't matter. Like he's not like to me. The car accident was a sort of judgment from God. Chigger, who has enjoyed preternatural luck and the rewards
Hmm.
of a careful assassin, is now struck down at random. He's not killed, by the way. He's just has an accident, and I think his arm's broken. By you know,
Yeah, it's implied he's probably going to
I
get
don't think
caught
so.
soon, and I think
I
that's what I
completely
thought.
disagree. I,
That's what I thought.
there,
Either way, he's going to be mortal,
yeah, like
is the idea.
right.
Yeah.
His divine protection is gone. His status as a demon, doesn't exist anymore, even though he's the only one who knows it. Uh, the the thing that I say that all of Cormac McCarthy's works are nihilistic, isn't that the thing about the torch thing, which is of course not nihilistic at all. But the thing is that it still doesn't really do anything. the Tommy Lee Jones character does not gun down Chigger. He doesn't actually take the torch anywhere. He's just a boomer. And he's going, "Oh, these old people, oh, these monsters, oh, these young men," and it's like and it's like I dig it, but he's still not doing anything about it. He's just bemoaning it. It's like if you look at it, right, every act of I know we're not talking about No Country for Old Men, but this is actually pretty important. Uh, the Llewellyn's kindness is what gets him caught. He says he's going to do something, he doesn't do it, then he decides, oh, well, I should actually do it. My conscience is bad. And he goes off, and it turns out that provides enough evidence for him to be started to track, where previously they had no evidence of his existence. They just know that somebody took the money. You have the old man who is powerless. He shows up late to every fight. There's no
Yep.
gun battle. Everyone's already dead by the time he gets there. Llewellyn is murdered. Was he murdered by Chigger? Or was he just murdered by some random Mexicans?
I
Uh,
believe random Mexicans.
right. So there's no like showdown between Chigger and Llewellyn. There's no show like these showdowns Chigger has is either with random Mexicans, random Fetties, and random people he meets along the way. Like Llewellyn's wife is a rando to him. The only reason
Hmm.
she's vaguely relevant is that she's Llewellyn's wife. It doesn't even matter what her name is. Llewellyn's wife will serve her. Uh, then you look back though and you look at the shopkeeper. That man was betting for his life. Chigger was, you know, just killing people. Uh, and it's
I
difficult.
get your point.
Like,
What?
here's the thing. Hold on. If there is a dream, like this is sort of a Chekhov's gun sort of thing. If there is a dream of a torch being passed on, there must be physical meaning to that torch being passed on. And the torch, if it implies the light of civilization, cannot be left unanswered. And it must be answered with blood in this sort of situation. Chigger had to be killed by the hands of the old man, the old sheriff, for it to mean anything. Or under the sheriff's orders. That's also acceptable. Like judgment from God, and then, or random chance. Because quite frankly, I don't believe Cormac McCarthy believes in God.
Oh no, he very clearly does not.
Right.
He's very open, I believe, about it. Uh, it's kind of the point of his books. I guess what this also gets to for me, though, is that this is one of the reasons that the Coen brothers, I admire them greatly as creators. They're actual artists,
Yes.
right? This is a change that's so subtle, but this is like a change that a genius would make, to be honest
Yes.
with you, right? Like this is somebody who sees the needs of the narrative and says it's almost there. All you need is literally this one moment, and it flips the script, kind of, right? Because
Yes.
I'll buy I get what you're saying, and you're right. I think maybe it's just the Coen brothers version that is different, that's special in this case, right? Like,
Yes.
because the Coen brothers are not nihilists. They are very much not nihilists. They're geniuses, and
Yes.
they will come up later on the list, so we'll see. We'll have to move on because we've been kind of stuck here for a while. So I'll go
Yeah.
on to my number, only on
But
number 9.
but
So
this is, I just want to say that there's very clear, to me anyway, very clear like what makes nihilism and what makes something not nihilistic. And that is, how much meaning is there to the things that people are talking about. If there is no meaning to what they're talking about, like the old man having a dream of a torch being passed on to him, uh, and there's no action on it, then the dream was just a dream and it has no meaning. There's no defense of the torch. There's no
yeah,
defense
I
of
get you.
civilization, like et
But in the
cetera, et
Coen
cetera.
brothers, right, the Coen brothers version changes this because in the wife rejecting Sugar, that by rejecting his coin flip, right, and having him choose to kill her anyway,
Yep.
Chigger is changed from a divine force, a demon, into a human who is then liable to divine justice, and that's
Yes.
exactly what happens. So, okay, we're gonna go to number 9. My number 9, which is On a lighter note, it's The Incredibles. So this is an interesting pick to put on here, I understand. I wrote a couple of articles on it actually for Castalia House. The first thing I want to stress is that The Incredibles is an incredibly well-made movie, right?
Yes.
Like, it's so for people who are like, really, you're gonna put a kids movie on here? Like, make no mistake, the filmmaking, the writing of The Incredibles is extremely strong.
Yeah.
Uh, People who know things about script writing and who know like the craft of it, one of the classic ways that you could tell that a script is well written is how many setups are paid off later in the movie, right? Setups, payoffs, setups, payoffs. The Incredibles has so many paid setups and payoffs in it. It's insane. So many things earlier in the movie are paid off by the end of the movie. It's such a well crafted film, right? Like, the fact of the matter is, like, every major character in the movie, all of them have a full character arc. Bob is certainly the main character, right? Like, he's the closest thing to a singular protagonist that we get, but all of them have a full character arc. Helen, Elastigirl, in the beginning of the movie, she says to Dash, "Everyone's special," to which Dash responds, "That's another way of saying that nobody is." Helen is not perfect. She is not entirely correct in this movie. And we know this because later in the movie, Syndrome throws this line back in her face to justify his plan, right? Everyone, and if everyone's special, he laughs and then says, "Nobody will be," right? His point being that you can't just pretend that you're not who you are, right? This is Helen is flawed in this sense in trying to hide Dash's greatness. Dash has an arc. It's an arc of humility. He wants to show, there is a point to what Dash is saying that he should be able to play sports, he should be able to do fun things. But there's also a point of if you're just doing it to show off, it's not a noble reason, it's not a heroic reason. Violet has an arc of self-confidence. She starts off afraid to use her powers, afraid of the world. It's literally reflected metaphorically in her powers and her name, Shrinking Violet. Her powers are that she can turn invisible and create force fields, and she grows in her power use, and this is all paid off at the end of the movie. Uh, the entire movie is structured on two grounds. It's a deconstruction reconstruction type of movie, so called decon recons sometimes. These are can be extremely powerful storytelling tools. Movies that are they deconstruct a certain genre and then reconstruct it by after you do that deconstruction, which bad movies or at least mediocre movies that will often get a lot of critical acclaim will start with a deconstruction and then end it with a deconstruction, right? That's where the movies will end. That is not as interesting as a decon recon because the decon recon acknowledges that there's a reason that we like these sorts of stories in the first place. You can't just ignore that. Watchmen is a deconstruction. Incredibles is a decon recon, and it deconstructs two different things. It deconstructs the superhero movie, and it deconstructs the concept of the family, right? Because you do two things. Aren't superheroes kind of silly? Don't they not make any sense? Don't they cause more problems than they solve? That's why you have the great satirical scene at the beginning where they're getting sued into hiding. And then you have the deconstruction of the family. Don't families just hurt you, right? Like, he could still be a superhero. Maybe his life would be better if he didn't have his family holding him back. Aren't they holding him back? Isn't that what we're seeing in the movie? And then because The Incredibles is a great movie and not just a good movie, they say no, both of those things are wrong. There's a reason we love superheroes. There's a reason we love these movies. I've seen people say that the big robot fight, which is a fantastic action sequence at the end of the one of the greatest CGI action sequences I think ever, uh, is that giant robot fight at the end of The Incredibles. And that action sequence, I've seen people criticize as saying, like, oh, they had to end it with a big bombastic action scene instead of the real final scene, which comes later, where Syndrome kidnaps Jack Jack. Both of those scenes were integral to the movie. You needed a big bombastic action sequence because it's deconstructing two things, the family and the superhero movie. The big bombastic action sequence at the end is to show the viewer this is why superhero movies are unironically awesome, right? You need to show that. You need to show people that it's not just silly, it's also great. And that action scene is great. And you need the scene with Jack Shack to show that this is why the family matters. Having a family. That's why literally their home is destroyed. They need to restart their lives, and their reaction is to laugh because they have now realized the true value of family, right? There's just also so many great scenes in this movie. The what they call the 100-mile dash sequence. There's a great director's commentary of The Incredibles that I actually highly recommend for people who are dorks like me and enjoy this sort of thing. Brad Bird's director's commentary is really, really good. He goes through like why he's making the decisions that he made. Uh, the thing about The Incredibles is that Brad Bird has an extremely tight grip on this film, right? Like he was very, very involved at every step. He was the very much the driving vision behind it, Brad Bird, who is a great director. And the 100-mile dash sequence, which is the one where Dash is on they're on the island and Dash is figuring out the limits of his powers on the island. It's honestly an incredible scene. It's literally like Dash doesn't knows that he has these powers, knows how that he can be powerful, but he doesn't know the limits of them. And he needs to figure it out on the fly while in the middle of a fight with very dangerous people who are trying to kill him. You also have the brilliantly shot scene where Mr. Incredible learns the evil plan of Syndrome, that there is no dialogue. It's all portrayed visually and with this unbelievable Michael Giacchino score in the background, by the way, as Mr. Incredible walks in and sees all of the heroes getting killed one by one down the line, and you start to realize the extent of this plan that Syndrome has killed hundreds of people, all for the goal of killing Mr. Incredible. It's just an incredibly well made film. Now, is this an objective top 10 film of all time? No, probably not. Uh, I grew up with it. I've rewatched it over and over and over again. Here's the thing about this list. For me, it works on two levels. I could never put a bad movie in the top 10, even if I personally enjoyed it. And don't get me wrong, I recognize that there are bad films that you can personally enjoy. I absolutely like that is a category that I am willing to state is a real category, right? If the Incredibles were bad, it would not go on the list. It's not bad. It's a great movie. Is it really an objective top 10 film of all time? No. However, this is where again to I personally enjoy it and I've loved it for so long that it needs to go in my top 10. So, there is a lot to love about it. There's a lot of depth to this movie. It's better than people give it credit for, I think. Like cuz it gets this kind of it kind of gets a minus mark on it for being a children's superhero movie, and it's not really fair because it's so well made that it's better than a lot of quote unquote adult films. Really, most adult films. It's better than most films, right? That's I think it's a good defense of why it's here.
I dig it. I want you to know, dear listeners, that my movies are here because I enjoy them immensely. I am a shameless glutton. This too is gluttony.
Yeah, they're all here. Like none of them would be here if I didn't enjoy them. But if anyone I knew for a fact was bad, but I just really enjoyed it, I couldn't justify putting it in the top 10. I hope that kind of makes sense.
All right. Uh, so my next favorite is One Piece Z. The One Piece movies are
Ooh.
probably some of the undersung parts of the One Piece kind of franchise. They're great side stories. They have almost no canon relationship to the plot, unless, except for things like backstory and whatnot. The plot of One Piece Z is pretty simple. There's a rogue admiral whose name is Z, who has a giant, cool metal arm and a bunch of loyal Marines. And he's looking to destroy the node points of the Grand Line and shatter the pirate era by shattering the world itself. Uh, Basically, by blowing up magma repositories and causing a tectonic shift very quickly. That's essentially what's happening. Uh, the opening scene is him fighting another admiral, and sort of and taking over a marine base full of these special bombs that are designed, as a last ditch weapon. Nukes, essentially. He takes a bunch of nukes. Then he goes through it. He meets Luffy. Um, escapes and all this other stuff. There's fight scenes. There's adventures where they where they meet up again and again and fight again and again. There's a great scene where, like, he's fighting Luffy and Luffy's having trouble because the guy's arm is a sea stone mechanical arm, which sea prism stone, which shuts down devil fruit powers. And so instead of continuing to fight Luffy, he just whips out his Derringer pistol and shoots Luffy in the gut with a sea stone prism and says, "All right, see ya. Hope you escape before the island blows up." And kind of wanders off, and it's like, why don't everyone just carry these things around? But it's great. I love it. Because they do talk about using sea prism nails in other places. Like, it's just a great movie. You discover that Z is motivated by the fact that his family and then multiple people he's trained, including whole batches of trainees, have been murdered by pirates without mercy. He's lost his family like twice or three times, and now he's going to shatter all the pirates he can, no matter the cost. uh, it's got a great emotional core to it that I don't think the other One Piece movies match if they try to have emotion, and it certainly doesn't have the action. They don't have the action that this one does. Because even though you have things like Strong World and the movie that came after Z, which was just kind of okay, the action doesn't quite compare the same way. Though Boa Hancock running up a mecha and kicking it in the face from the movie after Z is absolutely a Kino scene. Because you finally understand, oh, that's the reason why she's one of the Shishibukai, the seven warlords of the sea. She can run up sheer walls and kick kick mecha in the face. Makes sense. Explains things. And it keeps in the themes of One Piece with its love of freedom and its desire for something greater than yourselves. It pushes things to, how do I want to put it? It pushes it in a direction of emotional maturity that the main series does have, but that fans severely underestimate because Luffy is a goofball. Um, Current arcs on Egghead Island with Bartholomew Kuma notwithstanding. In the end, you have to look at the fact that the Great Pirate Era is full of murderous pirates. Our characters are one of the few actually peaceable pirates in the system, um, and quite a few of these people are absolute monsters. And there are people who are hurt by those monsters. And once they get power, their desire is to kill all the monsters that they can get their hands on, even at great personal cost. So to me, that there's a very reasonable setup to it that I think a lot of derivative movies just don't get. It's not about how canon it is. It's not about whether the certain things happen to the protagonists or not. It doesn't matter that the status quo is going to return back to zero. What matters is whether or not this is a good movie that would stand if all you knew, oh yeah, we're gonna watch a movie. There's this guy called Luffy and he has a crew of pirates and they're adventuring around. That's really all you need to know. There's Marines and they fight pirates. Like, that's it. That's all you need to know. There's islands all over the place. That there's a lot of stuff there that you could just see from uh, just from watching the movie over time. Anyway, that's why I absolutely adore this movie and watch it relatively often. I haven't watched it in a while though. I need to watch it again.
Fantastic. So, my number 8 on this list, and yeah, sounds like a good movie. I might want to watch it one day. I've never watched any of the One Piece movies, so maybe that's a good one to start with. I've
It,
also heard that
it's the best. So
there I've also heard that what's the guy who did the Wolf Children, Mamoru Hosoda did a One Piece movie that is supposed to be pretty good.
eh,
Uh,
I can't remember
but
which
that
one
I'm
though.
not sure. Anyway, so my number 8, this is the newest movie that is on the list by far, and it's a little surprising that it even made it onto the list, but I have to put it here. Godzilla minus one makes number 8 on the list. I wrote an article for it for Castalia House. This is the only movie I have ever gone back to the theater multiple times to see. I've seen it 3 times, and it's only been in theaters. I absolutely love this film. Uh, is it influential on me at all? No, it is not because it's frankly too new. Like it can't really have influenced anything that I've done so far. It came out in December of last year, 2 months ago, right? It just, and I mean just left theaters like 2 weeks ago. Uh but it is so unbelievably well made. It is scary. Like the lead actor in this is a movie that really isn't about Godzilla, right? Anybody who tells you who's watched this movie, they'll all tell you that. This is a movie about PTSD, about honor, about, what it means to be a man in a culture of honor. There's just something about the movie that like the men in Godzilla minus one are men. And they're not cartoon men either. They're not cartoonishly masculine. They're not like, they don't go up to someone and be like, I'm going to do all the work and you're not going to work at all or whatever. There's a genuine masculinity, right? A real one. You know, just like with the women, there's a genuine femininity, right? Real femininity. The love interest in the movie, her role is about as feminine of a role as you could possibly have in a film. She takes care of a child, she keeps the home, she eventually gets a job, but it is as a secretary. Her main purpose in the film is to support the male lead, right? That is the feminine purpose, the help of the film, right? And yet, she is an enormously influential character. She is probably the character that, of the people in the film, when you hear people who watch this film and go, I cried when I watched it, which I'm not surprised about, they probably cried over her scenes, right? Like, she was that big of a deal to the movie. There's a scene at the end of the movie with her in it that is so unbelievably moving because of how important of a character she is. And yet, she is an entirely feminine character. The people who solve the problem of Godzilla are the men. It's men that do it, right? Like, they get together, they decide they have a duty, they go out and they do it. And it's just everything. One thing that I've noticed on the rewatches is that the soundtrack of this film, you'll notice a theme in a lot of my films, and that's because a good soundtrack is very important to a movie, right? Uh, Interestingly enough, in number one probably has the least memorable soundtrack of all of the movies on my list. But even despite that, like a good soundtrack is so important to a movie. Godzilla minus one soundtrack and sound design are immaculate, just absolutely immaculate, right? Like the way they use the Godzilla theme. There is a scene at the end of the movie where Godzilla shoots out his atomic breath, which this movie portrays more in a more interesting way than any other movie I've seen. Like his atomic breath has so much impact in Godzilla minus one, but he shoots it out, and the way that they do it is that the musical cue for Godzilla's theme, which is a very famous theme, they match with like the rocking of the waves. So when a tidal wave hits, that's when the music cue hits. It's just so well designed on so many levels. They have this Jaws inspired action scene where Godzilla is chasing their boat and they're trying to throw mines into his mouth while they're desperately fleeing Godzilla until a battleship can come in and help them. Unbelievable. But the key here is really the lead actor, because the lead actor in this is so good, like so unbelievably good. People were saying like he might get awards buzz, and he ended up not, because he's a foreign actor and that's very difficult in America especially. But it's like there's awards buds for the lead actor in a Godzilla movie. Like, think about that for a moment. That's kind of insane. Godzilla movies, their human actors are not supposed to get awards buzz, and yet he absolutely deserved it because he took a character that in all respects, like easily could have been seen as some despicable, unlikable character. He could have been seen as some loser, as as whiny, but he portrayed his inner conflict so compellingly, and he portrayed it like he made him so sympathetic with, like, you totally understood his struggle, everything he was going through, his fight to improve himself, right? That you could not help but be on his side the entire film. That's the strength of this lead actor. The one thing about Godzilla Minus One is that there is talk of a sequel, and the director has teased it. While I hope that this director makes another Godzilla movie, to be honest with you, I kind of hope it's not a direct sequel, because this movie ended on such a perfect note for all of its characters that I don't really want to see them like ruin it with, oh, psych, guess things didn't end after all. I would rather him make a Godzilla movie set like, 50 years in the modern day or something, right? 60 years in the future when and then Godzilla rise up again. So at least they've bought some time. They could live out their lives, have a happy ending. But it's just a great movie, right? Like it's just so enjoyable to watch. Good story, well told. Highly, highly, highly recommended. And we are on number 7.
Number 7, Porco Rosso. I enjoy quite a few Ghibli films. The Cat Returns is one of my favorite movies. I can watch it all day if I wanted to. Of course, I don't, but I could. I enjoy it very much. But Porco Rosso is a much better movie. It follows the story of a air pilot, a dog fighter who's working as a mercenary in the Aegean Sea in a future where air travel was a bit more freely available um, than it was at the time in the same years. It goes through his guilt, his ideas of whether or not he needs to interact as a human or whether he's, just a pig. I always thought that the, sort of this connection between being a pig works well in both Japanese and English. It's always a great insult. So you have this man developing this character, um, and sort of working with humans again in a way that sparks kindness and goodness rather than uh, a bunch of negativity that you might expect. Um, it's also very funny, very likable. Fio is an absolute 10 out of 10 plucky lass character. All the characters are great. I think I like all the air pirates are funny. The scene where they're like, "Oh, Miss Fio, could we take a picture with you?" All right. And so all the pirates are like, cramming on board a stage. Then the chief air pirate punches them all out of the way of the picture, so it's just him with Miss Fio. Uh, abs, funny scene. Well worth the, well worth the enjoyment of it. Uh, there's also things like, how do I want to put it? Like it's just like a lot of these movies have a very comedic aspect to it, but there's a connection between how serious these movies are and how how much fun they have with it. Serious scenes need to be serious, but then there's also scenes where you can be a little cheeky. Um, where like the scene with the air pirate, punching out all his men so that he could be the only one in the picture with Miss Fio, or the American actor slash ace pilot, falling in love with every woman he lays his eyes on. And he has these series of movies where he has like Western cowboy gear, and there's a Tyrannosaurus Rex and a maiden in the background. Like there's tons of camp, tons of enjoyment, and it's all very well balanced out in the most enjoyable fashion. Back to you, Anthony.
Yep, and I love Porco Rosso. I've rewatched it multiple times. It also is pretty interesting in the Miyazaki canon because it's the only Miyazaki film to have an explicitly Christian philosophy. which is
Ooh.
kind of interesting. If you think about it for a moment, right? Like, and Porco Rosso was definitely very explicit about its Christianity. Normally, Miyazaki is Shinto, right? That's
Yes.
the perspective he's coming from, but not in Porco Rosso. Uh,
Huh.
and not in Porco Rosso because Miyazaki is an honest creator who knows that in the setting of the story he's telling, his positive characters would be Christian, and Porco has various conversations, that show like he's looking at things from a Christian perspective. So I'm thinking particularly, of course, you probably know, having seen the movie, of two scenes. The scene where they're all together and they say grace, and Porco looks very uncomfortable with it, and Theo
Yes.
winks at him. And then later, he has a conversation with Theo where he explains essentially why he feels so uncomfortable. And he believes that God cursed him for perhaps his cowardice.
Surviving.
Right. God cursed him, and that he is in fact he is in a living hell. And so prayers make him uncomfortable because he believes that he doesn't deserve to, be under God's favor. Right. So
Yes.
it's an explicitly Christian perspective, which is interesting.
Yep.
Uh okay, so my number 7. Uh my number 7 is actually Rocky. So, kind of unexpected, I understand, in this show because we've never talked about it, and we wouldn't talk about it. It's a relatively older movie at this point too, 70s. I think the original Rocky, like the franchise, has kind of been memed to death and back, right? Uh,
Hmm.
like especially when you get to like Rocky 4 is an extremely silly movie, right? Like when you get to Rocky 6, people are making like nursing home jokes and whatever, and then got rebooted kind of with the Creed franchise, which
Hmm.
is sort of okay and not great. In truth, and as weird as this sounds, like I actually like a few of the later Rocky movies. Like for example, that Rocky 6, which is called Rocky Balboa, is actually a pretty good movie. Like as weird as that sounds. Uh, I unironically would recommend people who are fans of the franchise watch Rocky 6. But the original Rocky is almost best as a standalone film. People forget just how good the original Rocky was and really what it was trying to say. The original Rocky is such a brutal film. Like, I don't think people understand, like, it is such a brutal film. Like, Rocky himself, for example, he's a thumb breaker. That's his job. He like works for a mob boss and goes around collecting money and threatens to break people's thumbs. Now, when we are introduced to Rocky and we see this, we can see that Rocky himself is a nice guy. He doesn't like this job, right? Like he doesn't want to be doing it. And he's even criticized by his boss for not being violent enough. Nevertheless, this is what he has to do to survive. His best friend Paulie, right, who runs a butcher shop. Uh, Paulie is abusive to his sister. Like, there's really no other way to say this. Like, he takes care of his sister and he belittles her constantly, tries to control her, right? This is Adrian, the one, that, again, she's memed to death in later movies. You can hear Rock Young Adrian,
I was
right?
thinking it.
Yeah, becomes a joke. But in the original movie, like her portrayal, they make this point. Rocky is not very smart, but he's very strong, and he has a good heart, and he uses his muscles to survive. And Adrian doesn't believe that she's beautiful, right? She believes that she's ugly, but Rocky sees her on the sees the beauty on the inside type of thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she's not like she's not Hollywood gorgeous. I'll put it that way. Like the casting choice for Adrian, they picked a woman. I wouldn't call her ugly. Like that would be mean anyway, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I would not call her ugly, but she's not like a typical Hollywood pick for that role, right?
Right.
Like, and there's a point to that. That's why Paulie constantly belittles her, saying like, "You'll be nothing without me. You'll be right." She has to stand up to him. Paulie is Rocky's best friend, but this is the world he's in. There is an absolutely brutal scene where Rocky is fighting at a gym, and the trainer, the head of the gym, Mickey, sees Rocky gets this chance to fight Apollo, right? Who's the champion? And he's literally picked because he thinks that his nickname, the Italian Stallion, sounds kind of cool, and nobody else is interested in fighting Apollo right now. And
Yeah.
it's like, for Apollo, this is a big joke, right? He doesn't expect this to be anything. And when Mickey learns that Rocky, he sees that Rocky is doing this, he's mad at Rocky because he says basically that Rocky is wasting his potential. Then Rocky gets the opportunity to fight Apollo, and Mickey comes back to Rocky's apartment, and Rocky's reaction to Mickey is actually to be like, screw you. You weren't there when I needed you. You blamed me for the fact that I was in this terrible situation, right? Get out of my house, right? Like,
Right.
it's actually a brutal scene. And then when Mickey hears the truth of it, you can see it really hurts him. He leaves the house, and Rocky gets over his pride. He realizes that Mickey would actually be a very good trainer, and he runs out and he grabs him. But like, this is the world that Rocky takes place in. The other thing too is that there's this idea of Rocky, like, oh, he's a guy who never gives up and whatever. Like, when we first meet Rocky, his reaction to learning he would fight Apollo is to turn down the fight. And he says, well, they ask him, like, why would you turn down the fight? And he goes, because it's going to be a quick fight. Like, I don't think it's going to be a good, I don't think people will want to see it. Right? Like, Rocky's self-confidence at the beginning of the movie is very low. Right? Like, he does not think he has a chance in this fight. Uh, and then, of course, what really makes the movie is you get to the fight itself. It was the Critical Drinker who said this as watching it. There is a moment in the final fight, the famous moment, you probably all know it, right? Where Rocky gets knocked down by Apollo in a later round. He has been getting the stuffing beaten out of him the entire fight. Mickey is on the sideline yelling, down, down, stay down. In other words, like, don't get up, he's gonna kill you, right? And Rocky ignores him and struggles to his feet while the soundtrack is playing in the background. So the Critical Drinker said this. He said, this is one of the perfect moments of cinema, and he's right. Like, I defy anyone who has watched the movie up to this point to watch this scene who is not completely invested in this fight. Like, I've never seen, when that scene is on, nobody talks when it's on, right? Like, you don't talk. You're just watching the scene. It's enough to, like, people tear up during that scene. You
Of
always
course.
that scene. It's so moving. And just the fact that at the time, having Rocky lose the fight was kind of a big deal. Like, that isn't how sports movies were supposed to end, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
now Rocky has set the template. But when that movie came out, it was like he lost the fight, but it didn't matter. It didn't matter that he lost the fight. Winning the fight wasn't the point. It was showing everyone, living out the potential of who you can be, right? It's showing people that you can be more than what they think you are,
Yep.
and that's what Rocky was about. And it's just a fantastic movie. It really does. I think it well earns its place at number 7 on my list.
Oh yeah.
And that's where I'll stop.
I have never seen any of the Rocky movies, and I'm okay with that. I probably
We
should though.
only watch the original. Here's the weird thing too. Rocky 2 everybody likes, right? It's a good movie. Uh, but in a weird way, I actually kind of think that it would be better if that movie didn't exist. Because Rocky 1 ended so perfectly that to continue the story kind of takes away the power of the ending, if that makes sense.
Yes. I get you.
But okay, number 6.
All right. Number 6 for me is Sucker Punch. Uh, this is why I don't really care about quality of the movie, and it's directly related to how much I personally enjoy things. Partially because things like the Shape of Water were very well received critically, but were quite frankly disgusting movies. I enjoy Sucker Punch. It is a movie that you can turn your brain off, listen to the kick-ass soundtrack, and just enjoy. Uh, there's all kinds of interesting things. There's layers to the story that overlap with each other in ways that I don't really see done anywhere else. A lot of people, I think, were confused by it and kind of like, oh, this is, a little fetishistic. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to stop thinking that. But the key of it isn't so much looking at the sort of like the base idea of it. It's sort of like seeing how far he can play around with these ideas. And then also there's a pretty good director's cut that really feel improves the movie because it gives some other characters motivation inside the imaginary world and not only the real world. Um, the soundtrack is an absolute banger, and it's well choreographed. To the fight scenes are choreographed to the music to perfection, and it just fits. It works. The use of these things as metaphors for what they're doing in the asylum world, uh, where it goes up between sort of brothel world and imagination world, where they where they might be, fighting giant samurai mechs, or they're in World War I trenches, which is one of the best scenes in any movie I've ever seen, just for the sheer enjoyment and fun of it. Um, like it's pretty great. They balance out the difference between mooks and elite soldiers incredibly well. There's one human German soldier and all the zombie German troops. Wehrmacht. What was the Kaiser's army called? It wasn't Wehrmacht. Whatever. Soldiers, and he meets the captain. They confront the captain to try and take this map of enemy movements, and the captain just starts throwing them around like rag dolls. It's until he's squished by a giant mech. Like it just works. Uh, I do believe that the director's cut is the appropriate way to do it because they actually have characters use some of their special weapons, and they're not just like window dressing. Um, the ending I feel is pretty interesting because it breaks it down to the two main characters, Sweet Pea and Baby Doll, and basically it's like, okay, well, do you want reality or do you want the imagination world? In the end, Sweet Pea chooses the real world. She's sort of like the Lancer, I guess. Loses her sister and all this other thing, sacrifices quite a lot. But then Baby Doll, who started it all when she accidentally murdered her own sister, chooses to stay in the imaginary world, uh, which, quite frankly, uh, works for me. There's, how do I want to put it? Uh, like, there's choices you have to make with guilt, right? Like, you can't just sort of like live your life without considering what goes on around you. And you have to decide whether or not you want to face reality or not. And I deeply feel that the fact that the main character chooses, the worst option, which is to let herself be lobotomized, which even characters in universe claim is like, look, we have to do it, but I really hope we, find a better way to do this because this is set before things like SSRIs and, psychology, which, like is bad in its own way, but it's not a lobotomy. Um, uh, there's a lot of lobotomy jokes going around in my head that I just cannot speak out loud. You also have different characters like Oscar Isaac's. Yeah, Oscar Isaac is in this movie, and John Hamm uh, as the two men in the story. There's also the stepfather, who's Gerard Plunkett, and then Scott Glenn as the wise man who shows up in Baby Doll's Delusions, and then turns out to be a bus driver in the real world. Uh, oh boy. Uh, it goes deeper than I feel like people are willing to give it credit for. Um, and because of that, I think people aren't really willing to look deeper into it. I think that there are some things that are completely ridiculous that should be given a little bit more respect than what they get. Yeah, it's Zack Snyder. Um, it's his. I'm pretty sure it's his only film to be original to Zack Snyder. But this is back in 2011. Uh, you know, if you turn your brain off, you're going to enjoy it. But I think if I were to say anything that people truly do not get, and it's a problem of them and not the movie, is that there are fundamentally just three layers of reality. There's base reality, brothel reality slash dance studio slash whatever, and then whatever adventure they're in for the length of the music video. And then they go back down to brothel, and then even sometimes into real world, and then it goes back up. Like there's there's an eloquence to it that I don't know how much can be attributed to Zack Snyder, but is certainly worthwhile to watch the movie. Anyway, that's number 6 for me.
Cool. Very interesting choice for number 6. Unexpected, I think, from a lot. So I'm still down on the sort of classic era movies list here. So my number 6 is Jaws. Uh, this is the first, I think, Steven Spielberg movie that truly reached like mega status. That reached a level of like pop culture saturation, right?
Yeah.
So it was when Spielberg was still like a young, up and coming, hungry type director. It had an infamously difficult, right, filming, and as it turned out, the movie ended up being fantastic. So here's the thing about Jaws: it is technically a horror movie, considered as such by its creator and many people. Uh, but when you watch it, I don't think of it as a horror movie. I think of it primarily, actually, as an adventure film, more than anything else. Now, it is certainly a horror movie. It has the very, very famous, uh,
Da-dum,
the Jaws theme.
da-dum,
Dun 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 dun
dum.
dun dun dun. Yeah, exactly. Right. It's certainly a horror movie, but I think what makes Jaws such a great film is that it functions on multiple levels. You can watch it as a horror movie, and it's a great horror movie, right? You can watch it as an adventure film, and it's a great adventure film. You can also watch it if you are a fan of dialogue and acting and character work, and it is very, very good at that. The best scene in the movie, as it will be agreed upon by almost anybody who has watched it, is the one where they are out on the boat and all the three men who are hunting for Jaws, and they start having a conversation with each other. This is where you get, a lot of the scenes that end up being memed later, right? Like the uh, the USS Indianapolis speech from Quint, for example. This is where you get that scene. It has some of the most iconic classic lines in cinema, some of which were even ad-libbed. Like, we're gonna need a bigger boat. I have read the script of Jaws, and we're gonna need a bigger boat was an ad-libbed line by Adrian Brody, or at the very least, it was made up, on set. It wasn't in the original script, right? Now, it is true. It will get criticism. It's like, oh, the shark doesn't look convincing. You barely see the shark. It doesn't matter. Uh, like, it really, really does not matter at all. And it's another adaptation from a book that is considered by most to be better than the book. So, in the book, Hooper, who is the scientist who shows up, and there's supposedly like the way the movie works is it's seen as like a clash of philosophies. You have Quint, the old sea dog, who starts off in the movie looking at it like a normal monster hunt, but turns Jaws into his Moby Dick, right? Turns into an Ahab figure as it advances. You have Hooper, who represents the new science, the science side of things, that the shark is not a monster. It's not, some primordial force of nature. It's a shark, right? And he's going to use the latest advances in scientific technology to catch it. And then you have Brody, who sits in the middle and says, I don't care what it is as long as you could get rid of it. Right? Like, and he moderates between the two. And Brody, of course, is afraid of the water, which is kind of the joke of the film, but he's the one who ends up taking responsibility for getting rid of the shark. So this is why Cooper in the book was a very different character. He was having an affair with Brody's wife, and in the final scene of the movie, Hooper is, or of the book, I should say, Hooper is killed by the shark, and Brody is the only survivor. And perhaps this worked okay when Hooper was having an affair with Brody's wife, because frankly, it makes him less likable and more deserving to die. However, I am reported that when Hooper in the movie, there is a scene where the shark is coming after him and he's trapped in a shark cage. And then they cut away and you see Quint get eaten and Brody kills him. And then Hooper pops up out of the water. Uh, his fate is left ambiguous up until that point, like very ambiguous. So when he pops up out of the water, I am told that in the theater everybody applauded, and I can 100% understand that because it's a great moment. It's a great tension releasing moment after a very intense fight with the shark, right? Uh, I don't know, like this is kind of difficult to talk about because it's just it's not the deepest film. Like there's no question it's not. But it's just a film that works on every level that it attempts to work on again, right? Just like I was saying with The Thing. But I think what puts Jaws over and ahead of The Thing to me is that The Thing, while the dialogue is good for the sort of movie it is doesn't have a lot of it. It's not a dialogue-driven movie. Whereas Jaws is and has incredible dialogue. The interactions between the actors in the movie are a step above The Thing, right? Like the way that they talk to each other, the conversations that they have and everything. It's just so well done. It's a little bit of a boring answer, I understand, but I think it is more than deserving of a number 6 spot on a best of list. It just did everything well, right? It accomplished what it wanted. Like I said, similar to what I was saying about The Thing, but there's a difference here in that I think that The Thing, while it accomplished everything it wanted to do, I think that Jaws was just a step above in terms of like the acting, the soundtrack, right? Um, the plotting. All right, go ahead. That's Jaws. Ben, number 5. I'm trying to move a little faster too because we're getting on to 9, and while we will definitely go late because we started late, I don't want to go too late.
Right,
Uh,
right.
go ahead.
For me, number 5 is Mad Max Fury Road. I enjoy the Mad Max movies quite a bit. Mad Max, the original one, is a lot better. Like, I think if people were to watch Mad Max Fury Road than watch the original Mad Max, they would have no idea what's going on. The Night Rider scene is cool. From the first film, Toe Cutter is a great villain. But Fury Road just ups it to what I want. From the trailer going, playing Dies Array, da 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 da, and it's like, that might have been a bit George Gershwin-y, but you know what I mean. And then he goes, "Oh, what a day! What a lovely day!" And then you look over and you see a giant swirling sand vortex coming in. It's great. Um, it's also one of those things where it's like people mean it as a like a, oh yeah, feminist triumph, Mad Max stepping away, ooh, and then I'm like looking at it, I'm like, you guys are gonna exhaust the water in a week and I'll be dead, dead. There's more humanity in Rictus Erectus, as they're carving out the dead child from Splendid Angarad, where essentially they ran off into the desert after a dream that no longer exists. And Erectus Erectus is going, I had a baby brother. He was perfect in every way. You have a lot more humanity in like side villains than you do in the bandits of, tenured feminist professors who all get murdered
No,
before they get back.
I
Uh,
think it was ER who pointed out that being in the harem of the creepy guy would have actually been considered by everybody there to be like a plum job. Uh,
oh yeah,
like that literally like they to call them sex slaves when in that particular environment is deeply misleading. Like in fact, they actually had an extremely cushy position that
yes,
was probably coveted by everybody else there because of the the environment they were in.
yeah. Like they're in an evil world where there is no hope and no place to run to, and they literally only escape because they think there's a place where to run to where they won't be sex slaves. But it turns out no, it doesn't exist anymore. Whatever happened to it either got destroyed or was mismanaged to hell and back, which I absolutely believe is the case. That it was mismanaged and not just destroyed. Um, like it's one of those things where like you can think about it and it's like, yeah, this is gonna be this, and Charlize Theron's gonna be a girl boss, and it's like, so where's that take you? To die in the desert
Mm-hmm.
because and then you open the floodgates for everyone to drink the water. Like it's one of those things where like, sure, absolutely, Immortan Joe was evil. They were in an evil situation, but at the same time, there was only desert for as far as you could see. Uh, like there's like, how do I want to put it? Like the only reason they escaped is because Imperiosa gave them hope, but at the same time, it was like she was a war boss in her own right. I do feel that they should have considered whether or not she would know about the green place and where it was. Like she could have gone there at different times. It's implied that she was under Morton Joe for like a decade or something. Like there's things to it. Like in the end, to me it's like, oh yeah, feminist fantasy, but at the same time I'm looking at it, I'm like, man, you all are gonna die.
Yep.
All right, go for number 5, Anthony.
Okay, my number five. I have a feeling there's going to be people who are gonna like really dislike that I put this at five, but Ben already did Sucker Punch and Mad Max Fury Road, so I feel like I'm
Wow.
safe. One has a reputation as being a feminist fantasy, and the other just has a reputation as being really bad.
It isn't
So
bad.
no, Sucker Punch is what I'm talking about. It has a reputation for
I
being
knew what you were
really
talking
bad.
about, Anthony. I can read reviews just like you can.
Okay. Anyway, the producers. So I am talking about the original producers, the Mel Brooks producers, not the remake, the musical remake, which I think is pretty terrible. This is the one, and it has Caitlin mentioned earlier that she was a big Gene Wilder fan. Gene Wilder was the star of this, along with Zero Mostel. It is not a musical; it only has one song. Uh, However, it is my favorite comedy. It's the funniest movie I have ever seen, and I think that this is one where I think that my ranking and overall rankings, while they probably wouldn't converge at this high, they would converge to be like, yeah, The Producers is probably one of the greatest comedies ever made. I don't really have much to say about it, except that I find the central joke really funny. Like, for people who don't know, The Producers is about a big New York producer, Zero Mostel, who's is the character, Max Bialystock. It's all very Jewish, which is the point and part of the joke, right? Uh,
Right.
so Max Bialystock is a big New York producer who has produced a string of flop after flop. And an accountant comes in, played by Gene Wilder, and casually remarks to him, "Hey, in theory, if you raised more money than you needed for a show, and then put it on and it flopped, you could actually make more money from the flop than with the hit. I mean, you would be caught, you'd have to flee." And then he goes, "That's a great idea," and he convinces Gene Wilder, who plays like a very neurotic, very submissive, I guess what I would call a type of character, right? I don't know how else to put it, but who is very funny. He carries a blanket with him constantly. Uh, his name is Bloom. So also, I believe that's also like he's also coded as Jewish. Uh,
Yes.
but yeah, his name is Bloom, and he carries a blanket with him for anxiety, like that sort of thing. And Bialystok decides that they are going to try and put on the worst possible Broadway show. So the show that they settle on, they find a script for a show called Springtime for Hitler,
Eh,
uh, written by an actual like neo-Nazi. So they need to go to his house and convince him to do the show, and then this is the movie. And the plot of the movie is that, of course, when they do it, at first, all of the critics start to walk out thinking it's incredibly tasteless. But the show is so bad that they become convinced that it's actually a parody, and the show becomes a massive hit. Uh, so this is, of course, a disaster. Since it is a massive hit, they will realize, that they committed massive fraud unless they do something desperate. So they decide to blow up the theater. Uh, but when they somehow mess up the fuse somehow, and they get blown up with it, and the movie ends with them in jail putting on a show in the jail and clearly selling stocks to the jail show, like selling more than it costs to put on the show, right? And that's how the movie ends, of them just continuing the fraud in prison. uh there's
amazing.
really nothing to say about this movie, like, except that I think that the central joke of it is extremely funny. I think that all of the jokes in it are extremely funny. The acting is phenomenal. Uh, Zero Mostel, Gene Wilder. Uh, I can't remember the name of him, but the guy who they hire to play Hitler is like a hippie, and he does a song for their audition called "Love Power." And I can't remember the name of the actor, but he was extremely funny in it. Uh, it just they make the director incredibly flamingly gay. This is why sometimes you will see people talk about the producers nowadays being problematic, because they make jokes about the fact that the director is gay and wearing a dress when they meet him. The jokes are very funny, as long like the of course it's problematic if you think that there is a problem with making fun of transvestites, but if you don't, they're very funny
I
jokes.
don't get it. How is this a joke? This is just the real world. I don't understand,
Well,
Anthony.
that's why it's a joke. It is the real
Oh,
world. You are correct. It's a satire of the actual Broadway, a very good
oh,
one. And a very good one. Uh, the fact that the producers are Jew coded is also very funny. Uh, that they need to go to the neo-Nazi and convince him that they are interested in buying his show, but they're both Jews, and they need to pretend the entire time that they're sympathetic to the Nazis. Uh, it's great. It's just really, really funny. I am sure there are people out there who are like, I don't know, it's Mel Brooks is Jewish and he made a Jewish coded show and you like it, but like, you know what? It's great. It's very funny.
I
I,
mean, it
I wish
sounds
I
funny.
had something. Yeah, I wish I had something more substantive to say than that. The fact of the matter is, this is not a comedy that has like a deep meaning to it. It's just either the jokes work or they don't, and I think they work.
Yeah, I'm a similar feeling of a show called Arsenic and Old Lace. I used to watch it every Halloween, and I need
Oh,
to
that is
again.
such a good movie.
Such a good movie.
Arsenic, it's so good. And
Oh
you're
my god.
right. Is it deep? No, it is not deep at all. Is it extremely funny? Yes, it is extremely funny. You are correct. Good honorable mention.
Oh yeah.
Uh, go ahead.
No, Johnny, not the Melbourne way. Number four is Treasure Planet. Uh, there's a series of movies, and this is sort of like coded in for a bunch of movies like this, where it's like classic sort of boy adventure novels, right? Treasure Island, Robinson Crusoe, Swiss Family Robinson, all this other thing like that, where you have these sort of adventure films, put in there, and then of course you have movies like Muppets Christmas Carol and Muppets Treasure Island, which are 10 out of 10. Where you have Michael Caine basically treating all the Muppets like real people, and was it? I think it's Tim Cook treating all the people like Muppets. It's just great, and acting like a Muppet himself. But then you have Treasure Planet, which I think, as a serious, sort of like creation of the timeless story, does very well for itself without just being a one-to-one with like added jokes or something. You have Jim Hawkins. They actually play up, where Jim Hawkins' dad is not, and that's not with his family. You have him actually have a relationship with Long John Silver, which doesn't happen in the book really the same way. You just have a lot of great interactions that works, even though some things like with the second mate and with Isaacs and others, doesn't quite get there. And you also have like sort of a increase in the horror that exists, when in scenes where Jim Hawkins is stuck on on the ship with murderous pirates. Uh, Long John Silver remains threatening. There's great musical scores, great CGI, great animation. Again, this is one of those movies like Titan AE and another one that's going to be in my number one slot, where essentially decently serious American animation was strangled in the crib. And yeah, sure, it was a Disney film, but at the same time, it's like this is one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen, and it flopped. I don't understand it. I don't get it. I do not comprehend why Treasure Planet and, for that matter, Titan AE are failures. People will have to sit my dumb self down and explain to me point by point why Titan AE is bad, why Treasure Planet failed. Like, what was it? The Cat Girl? You think the Cat Girl captain? What was it like? Was Long John Silver too inhuman? Like, we've all seen what's his name? The Doctor, Funk Walk, where he's like walking like a Chad, from that Russian cartoon, which randomly spiked in the algorithm for no reason. Like I literally do not understand it because I watched the movie because I was sick in bed on a Sunday morning and couldn't go to church. Because it showed up in my algorithm for no reason, along with a whole bunch of other people. And it's like, yeah, there's more threatening Long John Silvers. There's more of this. There's more accurate here and there. But at the same time, Treasure Planet is simply the best of them. They actually hit on Jim Hawkins as a character with what he needed from the men around him. And it becomes a bit deeper than just a boy adventure story to something that can be enjoyed and brought out generation after generation.
Yeah, I saw Treasure Planet, I think, once years ago. It's a good movie. I enjoyed it. I can see why you would put it high on a list. There's a certain element with these lists of what resonates with you personally, and I guess Treasure Planet just kind of didn't, but I totally understand like why you
Yeah.
would hold it in high stature. It's a beautiful movie. Uh, all right, so my number 4 then is Casablanca. So yeah, this is probably the movie that most closely aligns with all of the all time lists. It is very, very, very often ranked as the greatest movie ever. It tends to swap with like Vertigo and Citizen Kane, depending on the mood of the critics at the time. You know, uh, but you know what? Like, there is good reason for this. It's just a flawless film. What can I tell you? Like, I don't even. What is there to say about Casablanca at this point that has not been said already? It works on the level of romance. It works on the level of war movie. It works on the level of like thriller. Uh, the acting is phenomenal. The plotting is phenomenal. It has so many iconic lines and moments. The fame. There's just the things about this movie like that work. I don't even know where I'm trying to figure out where to start in terms of like why I would put it at number 4. That's just not because it's a basically perfect film, right?
Yeah.
Uh, it is a basically perfect film. Yeah, I mean we have Humphrey Bogart as the lead. Bogart at the time. So here's where I'll start with. So Bogart at the time when this film was made was sort of a B movie actor. This movie was not expected to be a great movie. The script was rewritten a lot on the fly. It was one of those I don't want to say happy accidents exactly cuz don't get me wrong, the people who were in it and the people who made it were trying to make it good. right? So it's not entirely fair to say that it was accidentally good. However, certainly nobody expected the movie to be as good as it was, right? It was based off a play that was actually discovered later. And the play is, of course, I haven't seen it and I haven't read the script, but the critical consensus and the consensus of people seems to be that the play is vastly inferior to the original story. He memes the memes that were created from this movie. Like, I can think of at least like 3, 4 lines in this movie that end up becoming iconic lines. The
Yeah.
ending of the movie is perfect, right? It is a perfect ending. So, okay, this is a good. Actually, here's a good thing for me to kind of latch on to. Casablanca is my model for what I call the manly romance, right? Now, there are two. This is an entirely unscientific thing that somebody who is like really into romance can surely dispute, but I have found it a useful heuristic myself. So I consider there to be two types of romances: girly romances and manly romances. And this isn't good and bad romance, it's just the type of romance enjoyed by each sex. In a girly romance, two people will give up anything, specifically the man normally, but sometimes the woman too, right? They will give up anything to be with the person they love. They will sacrifice anything, they will give up anything to be with the person they love. That's the girly romance, and it involves that sort of sacrifice for because the other person is the only one that matters. Titanic is a classic example of this, right? Titanic, The Notebook, these are girly romances. In a manly romance, it's the reverse. Two people want to be together, but one person, normally the man, has a higher duty that makes it impossible. Casablanca is the classic version of the manly romance, right? Like, at the end of the movie, he is in love with Ilsa. Ilsa loves him. They have a history. They can be together, right? But the main character turns her down because he realizes that there are more important things than their love for each other. There is a higher duty. This is masculinity, right? In a nutshell. Sacrificing your own personal wants and desires for a greater good because you realize that you being happy and her being happy isn't as important as the a very important resistance leader escaping and you fighting the Nazis, right? Like, it's this recognition that there's something bigger. And that's why, Casablanca is it's so rewatchable. You will rewatch the movie, you will find something new every single time. Uh like, there's always something to watch. The character arc is perfectly executed. The finale is perfectly executed. The pacing is dead on. You know, why the reason it's not higher on the list is, to be honest, it's probably the objectively best movie on this list, right? Like, I am a believer in objective quality. Casablanca is being the perfect film is probably the objectively best movie on the list. However, it is not the movie. There are movies that I believe are similar, almost as good in quality, that have meant more to me personally, and that's why they're higher. But Casablanca at number 4 is a very, very strong showing, and well deserved. All right, go ahead, Ben. Number 3, top 3.
Oh boy.
Woo!
Number three for me is Castle in the Sky. Uh, Another Miyazaki film. I enjoy Castle in the Sky. It is, we're talking here, sort of like male romance, female romance, boys adventure. Castle in the Sky is another boys adventure that just works well. Uh, you
I
know,
adore this movie.
oh
I
yeah,
gotta say, yeah, I really do.
it's still my favorite Miyazaki film. Like, I haven't included The Boy and the Heron just because I haven't rewatched it, just to see if I feel the same way about it. But it's Castle in the Sky follows Patsu as he rescues Princess Shida from a being knocked unconscious and floating down into Castle just never resonated with me. Oh, floating down into his mine shaft, and then he launches into a quest, both to save her and to sort of keep power away from the evil Mosca, played by Mark Hamill. Everyone's great in this, but Mark Hamill really sells it pretty well.
Yes.
Uh, there's all kinds of adventure. There's sky pirates, and there's a balance between like actual threat and like actual threat and like keeping it lighthearted. Like there's this moment with the robot where she awakens the robot, this ancient servitor of her family, and it just throws itself without thinking. I mean, it is a robot, right? But you have this like moment of empathy with it where like you see that these are the ancient protectors of her family. She activates it and it just, without cost, saves her. And then like at the end, rather than, keeping on going on to a rampage, it helps her escape, even at the sacrifice of itself, which I've always kind of teared up at, just because it's this great moment. You can have machines, that are unfeeling, soulless robots, but then there's scenes like this where you can actually play around with what you can do with a machine. If a machine is programmed a certain way, there's a noble way to do it, and there's an ignoble way to do it. Sort of a sin and holiness dichotomy, right? We don't have a gradient of morality. We merely have sin and not sin. Um, you don't have free will when you're choosing between Burger King and McDonald's. Uh, so if the machine doesn't have free will, is it then a noble servitor or is it an ignoble servitor? Unable to move out of what it is and into something that could actually serve. Rather than continuing to fight, it gives Sheeta to Patsu for the escape. This sort of a question of whether or not like whether a machine, how do I want to put this? Like when it serves, because all good holy machines serve. Does it serve well, or does it serve in a way that's fundamentally destructive to its masters? And I think they hit on this sort of pathos for a unfeeling, very alien-looking machine that is paid off later in the movie with the caretaker of the castle in the sky. Like it's one of those things where it's just like it's been is it's just in my head, right? It's one of the foundational pieces of art that's in my head when it comes to like animated movies. The machine, the music blares da da da, and then it like rips through, whole sections of the castle with a laser beam, while everyone's panicking and freaking out and trying to kill it. And also, it's trying to protect Sheeta, and Patsu is also staging a rescue, and it becomes this bigger and bigger and bigger, and then she escapes at the last second and the robot is destroyed, and it just works. um and again, it's paid off. There's great scenes of comedy where like the air pirates are just hilarious. Even though they are, murderous air pirates and are shown doing violence with others. Like there's the scene where it's like, oh, you guys, where the air pirate queen goes, oh, you guys should find a girl like her. She's plucky and all this jazz. And they're like her? And so they're like trying to flirt with her and stuff like that because they're just air pirates. Then they have the scene where like the captain of the miners and the big burly air pirate have this like manliness off, where they burst their shirts. And then there's a scene where the wife comes out and she's like, "I'm not mending that." And then he deflates, and then the air pirate punches him in the face, and it starts a riot. Like it's like there's this swashbuckle to it that just doesn't end, and it's so enjoyable throughout. The air pirate, when she meets Sheeta after the climax, goes, "Oh, they shot your pigtails off. Oh," and she like hugs her to her chest. You must have been in so much, you must have been so frightened they shot your pigtails off.
Hmm.
It's a great scene. I love that whole film, start to finish. Lots of great comedy. Patsu, I guess, is a bit bland compared to the rest, and so is Muska. But like they,
No, no, I love Patsu.
Patsu's great. Don't get me wrong. But then like you think about the kid from The Boy and the Heron and Howl and other people like that. There's like Patsu works great, but I can't really describe his character other than he is the heroic protagonist. He has a bit of an artsy streak when he plays his trumpet, but in the end,
Nonsense. He's optimistic. He immediately. One of my favorite things about this movie is that he immediately is all in on Sheeta.
oh
He's
yeah,
all in on everything. His father disappeared. He has a dream of finding the castle in the sky. He's a great
he's
protagonist.
great. I just don't think he's very deep, and I kind of wish he was.
It hurts.
Actually, you know what? I recant. I recant everything. Don't put away the thumb screws. No need to attach me to the strappado. I give up my heresy. Patsu is a great character, and I have no idea what I said. Dunk me in the holy water, priest. I'm ready.
Uh, so I'll tell you this: what I like about Castle in the Sky is that when you describe the plot, you realize that what we're actually talking about is an extremely classic fairy tale. Like everything about it were think about this for a moment. This is the story of a princess from a hidden city in the sky falls out of the sky and is discovered by an orphan boy. They fall in love, and a usurper to the throne wants to marry her. Not this is all subtext in the movie, the marriage, but that's the implication here, right? Like
Yes.
kind of. Who has a usurper to the throne, who has a hidden connection to the family, wants to find and take over the secret magical flying city, and the orphan boy must rescue her from his evil clutches. Like it is a classic fairy tale,
It's
but
great.
it's told in a way that it's almost disguised. Like it's such a
Yes.
cool idea.
I,
I
I
I love the way that Miyazaki tells the story.
yeah, it's pretty great. I love it. Uh, yeah, I don't really have any criticisms really when I'm sane. When I've regained my senses, I fell into a swoon and didn't know what I was saying, Anthony. You have to understand.
I understand, Ben. I forgive you,
Thank you. Thank you.
but so it still goes on your record.
No.
Okay, no. Uh, okay, number 3. So I will have a Miyazaki on here eventually, but we're now in the top 3, and it's not there yet, so that should tell you something. Uh, my number 3 is the Coen Brothers' True Grit. True Grit has been made into 2 movies, so it was made into a 1969, I believe, movie with John Wayne that John Wayne won the Oscar for. In truth, if you've ever seen the movie, don't get me wrong, Wayne is good in it, but he got it. It was basically a lifetime achievement Oscar because he had never won one before. He's good, but not special. Yeah. Uh, and the guy who plays LaBeef in the 1969 movie is a country singer who can't act. He is not very good. And the girl who plays Maddie is fine, but she is also too old for the role.
Mm.
In contrast, the Coen Brothers' True Grit is a masterpiece. The Coen Brothers' True Grit, first of all, stars Haley Steinfeld in her first major role, and it made me a fan of hers for life. She is outstanding, steals the show. And she steals the show, unlike in the original movie, where LaBeef was played by a country singer. LaBeef is played by Matt Damon, who does an excellent job. And Rooster is played by Bridges. What's his first name?
Jeff.
Jeff Bridges? Yeah, thank you. Rooster in this movie is played by Jeff Bridges, which I will not go so far as to say that Jeff Bridges is a better actor than John Wayne. As good of an actor as Jeff Bridges is, I will say he is a better fit for the role of Rooster Cogburn than John Wayne is, because in truth, John Wayne is too heroic for Rooster. Uh, Jeff Bridges, in contrast, gets down to the sort of nitty gritty of the character of why Maddie chose her, or Maddie chose him to lead it. He's not a particularly good person, and he is not a hero, but he's willing to kill, and he's a scrappy survivor. Uh, I have read the original True Grit book. the way I would describe True Grit is that it has a sort of Old Testament style justice to it, right? Maddie is out for revenge, and it's a Christian revenge. It's a Christian revenge that doesn't really search for forgiveness. It searches for an eye, right?
Mm.
And that's the law of the West, and that's the law that she lives by. And what makes the Coen Brothers version better is a few things. So, first off, I have read the book as well. It is a good book. But I actually prefer the Coen Brothers movie, which is probably very much in the minority, I would expect, but I really do. One reason is that the Coen Brothers movie adds a scene. Once again, this is like such a direct adaptation. They make one change, just like in the No Country for Old Men, but it adds so much to it. In this case, it doesn't change the message in any meaningful way. Like, I would really, really strongly argue that the message is identical. However, it does make it clearer. So in this scene, in the book, they're traveling for a while, and then Maddie is captured by the villain's gang, and then Rooster and LaBeef come to rescue her. The movie changes this slightly. Uh, LaBeef decides that he's been searching for too long and has to leave. So he leaves that night. And then Rooster, when LaBeef leaves, decides to break the contract and also leave. Right? And Maddie admits to LaBeef that she misjudged him. And she begs Rooster to keep his word, and Rooster is a loser, so, which is really what he is, right? Like, he's a loser. And he tells her, no, I'm not doing it. I'll break the contract. I don't care. And then she's kidnapped the next day, and both LaBeef and Rooster go back for her. Adding this moment gives Maddie a much clearer arc. Like, it's there in the book, that she doesn't respect LaBeef as a person at first, but grows to respect him. But it's much clearer in the movie by having her have that moment where she is forced to humble herself in front of LaBeef and say, I was wrong, I misjudged you, right? And also have a moment of clarity regarding Rooster, where, she hires Rooster because he has true grit, but true grit isn't going to get you loyalty. True grit's not going to make you a good person, right? And LaBeef ends up, however, Rooster proves in the end, too, that he's really, he does care for the girl, right? He'll put himself at risk for her. The other thing is that in the original movie, LaBeef is killed. And in the book and in the Coen Brothers movie, it's actually left ambiguous what happens to LaBeef. He is knocked out, and Rooster leaves him in the middle of the desert. And Maddie later says that she never heard from him, but that doesn't necessarily mean anything since it's the 1800s. Yeah.
Right.
So she says, like, for all I know, he's still alive. So his fate is actually left ambiguous, and we don't see him die on screen. So it is very, very possible that LaBeef survived, right? Whereas in the original movie, LaBeef is killed. Also, Maddie loses an arm, and this is the other reason that the Coen Brothers' True Grit is superior to the 1969 version. It keeps the much, much more powerful ending of the original book, where we see that Maddie's grit did not actually serve her well in life, right? Like, that you need more than that. She grows to be an old woman, and she is alone. She reveals that she never married, that she just didn't have time for that. And when she goes to find Rooster, we learn that Rooster had joined a traveling Wild West show and dies just before Maddie shows up to meet him. So Maddie has him buried in her family lot. So Rooster dies alone, playing a character, a shadow of his former self, because just like with Maddie, the grit that served him well in the West will not serve him in the modern world, and neither of them were able to adapt, right? Maddie loses her arm and ends up alone, and the final line of the movie is incredibly sad. It's time just gets away from us. And that's it. That's how the movie ends. Like, but it's a much more powerful ending. It's a much more powerful ending because it shows that, like, it's not that simple as saying, like, oh, you need true grit. No. Maddie was fit for a world that by the time she grew up no longer existed. And especially, this is what happened with Rooster, but in her case especially, because she was a woman, right? She was a girl. It really was not fit for her. That's why she doesn't get married. That's why she ends up alone. Nobody is interested in a woman with true grit. right? Which sounds mean. It sounds wrong, but it's true, right? Like, and the movie is honest because the Coen brothers are honest. This is I have seen several Coen brothers movies, and this really cements to me that like they are probably the finest living filmmakers.
Yeah.
As I think about it, like Miyazaki, of course, yeah. So I can't really say that 100%, but like in terms of live action at least, they're probably the finest living filmmakers
Right.
because they have this genius touch of knowing how to get the most out of their stories. I don't know how else to describe it, right? Uh, it is also the reason it's higher than some of these other movies on this list is that I watched it young and it had an immense impact on me. I have written characters that have like taken inspiration directly from True Grit. I have named characters, so Tales of the Once and Future King. The character of Maddie, who is one of the leads in that story, was named after Maddie Ross. Like it this movie really really impacted my writing and like how I viewed art later on. uh and I do like I could rewatch it all day. Haley Steinfeld is truly stunning in this movie. Like the fact that she's stealing the show alongside Matt Damon and Jeff Bridges is just unbelievable, but she absolutely does. Like she is compelling to watch every time she is on screen. Like it's really something. Okay, number 2, Ben.
The Labyrinth. Jim Henson's The Labyrinth. Yes, the one with David Bowie. I enjoy it. I enjoy it very much. I enjoy the music. I enjoy David Bowie. I enjoy Jennifer Connelly. I enjoy the various Muppets. There's not a thing I don't enjoy in it. All the songs are great. While some of them are pretty wacky, especially the ones with the people throwing their heads around, it's enjoyable throughout. David Bowie is clearly in his element as the wacky Goblin King. Um, I have stayed up until like 3 a.m. during Dragon Con to watch that film. It was pretty great. There was like three other people. Uh, I talked to nobody. There's there's how do I want to say it? I don't really enjoy complexity in my movies. And I don't mean complex characters or anything like that. I mean like complex plots and intrigue. I don't really get it. Sometimes I forget things. I'm in the moment. I want to enjoy it, and I want there to be a good flow to it. Um, Thinking through like Sucker Punch, yeah, that's actually a pretty complexly designed movie. But at the same time, there's a clear flow of logic between step to step to step, and in the labyrinth, there's a complete and total flow of logic in a fairy tale sense. Uh, there's no real criticism that I could seriously labor against it. Jennifer Connelly's character is an absolute doll. She walks around through different places and different adventures, meeting, betrayal and friendship and all this other thing that comes through it. With an amazing set, an amazing song list, performed by David Bowie, himself. Um, in some cases, uh, it's it's just good. It's great. It's fun. It's enjoyable. I think if people put too much meaning into it, it's kind of ruined. But it's just there does need to be fairy tales that are just fairy tales. These movies have to exist. You can't always subvert all the time. If somebody says like, the labyrinth is subversive, I would have no idea what they were talking about. It's an adventure of a girl who goes to the Goblin King kingdom after she makes a foolish wish for her brother to go away because he's interfering with her social life because her boomer parents don't really, like force her to do things like babysit. No, actually, she's in the wrong, but it's it's very clear that, there's not a deeper formula than what it needs to be. It doesn't have pretensions for things it's not. It exists as itself, which is a wonderful and whimsical adventure, full of peril and fun songs, and leaves you with a good feeling. in the end. Things are absolutely creepy throughout it, and it balances out the adventure and the horror and the how do I want to put it? The tension that these sort of stories need to function correctly. And of course, you have dance, magic, dance, dance, magic, dance. It's great. I can absolutely imagine like the selfish sort of rulers of goblins, not like hell rulers of goblins like Maleficent, but like David Bowie's character. It's like, all right, guys, you know, we're waiting for the next thing to do, so we're gonna work on these dance routines, and they just do it, and it'd be horrible. It's like you think the Oompa Loompas just pulled those songs out of nowhere? No, they practiced that, Anthony. The Oompa Loompas knew that these things would happen.
Oh yes.
Oh yeah.
Uh, Mwahaha. Conspiracy theories.
Are they?
Okay, cool. So, anything else to add before I go? Because you kind of you kind of went on a tangent.
No. I love The Labyrinth. It's a great movie. Um, I think it's stuck in a sort of idea where it's like the idea that it's a quiche or something, and it's like no. I think it's just good.
Nice. Okay, my number two is finally we reached the Miyazaki movie on my list. Miyazaki, which is it's a little strange because Miyazaki's my favorite director. All right, so my number two is Princess Mononoke. A little background here. I believe that Miyazaki has three masterpieces. Like, and I try to differentiate between what I consider to be objectively best and personal favorite. Now, the Miyazaki films that I rewatch the most, personal favorites, are Castle in the Sky, Howl's Moving Castle, and I just blank Porco Rosso, right? Which are
Hmm.
all great movies in their own rights. Uh, all great movies in their own right. I absolutely can understand why somebody would have it high on their own list or whatever, right?
Hmm.
But I think his three objectively best films are, and I might, by the way, add The Boy and the Heron to this list, but I would need to rewatch it a time or two.
Yeah.
But his three objectively best films are Spirited Away, uh, The Wind Rises, and Princess Mononoke. So Princess Mononoke, why do I rank it so highly? In truth, it took me multiple viewings to fully appreciate it, but the more that I have seen it, I've seen it now at least three times, maybe four, right? Like, the more that I have seen it, the more and more that I have gotten out of it, and the more have I have realized the sheer depth of this movie, how brilliantly everything is put together. If you really want to know, like, why do I put it so high at number two? I think of it as like people praise Game of Thrones for having an extremely deep and complex plot and world with many layers, with shades of gray and right and wrong. And this is not wrong, especially in its early seasons and early books or whatever, right? Like, there is a genuine quality to Game of Thrones that needs to be acknowledged, right? Uh, but Princess Mononoke, in my opinion, it's sort of like if you have all of those things in Game of Thrones and then you made the story superversive, right? Like, and that's kind of what Miyazaki did in Princess Mononoke. It's just a movie that, as I rewatch it, the number of layers and levels that it works on is astonishing. Like, when they get people will misinterpret this movie, in my opinion, as a feminist film and as like a hyper environmentalist film with no subtlety. Both of these interpretations, I think, are flat out wrong. Yes, it is true that if you ask like Toshio Suzuki, and Miyazaki, like, oh, is it feminist? They'll just be like, oh yeah, sure, it's feminist. Like, they're answering questions from critics who obviously see feminism as a good thing, right? Like, I
Hmm.
don't think that that was really in either of their minds when they made the movie. I do think, don't get me wrong, that's not to say that I don't think that Miyazaki was not intending to portray like women in a particular way, but from the Western philosophical perspective of feminism, I do not think.
Hmm.
Right? Like, uh, when Ashitaka, so the main character, for people who don't know Princess Mononoke, it's about Ashitaka, is attacked by a boar that has transformed into a demon. And when he kills the boar, his arm is cursed, which gives him immense strength, but is going to kill him very, very soon. He's given a timeline of like weeks, maybe months. It's not going to be long before it kills him. So he needs to leave his people who, he is their prince, but he needs to leave, and he needs to figure out a way to cure his arm. He travels to find the source of what happened to the Boers and discovers a small frontier town called Irontown, led by a mysterious woman named Lady Eboshi. And Lady Eboshi runs the town and has made it wealthy, though everybody loves her. But as Ashitaka explores and starts talking to people, there is something very off about Irontown. Like, the women are all happy, but the women are all happy and they all adore Lady Eboshi, but Lady Eboshi appears to be intentionally separating the men and women. She seems to, for some reason, not want the women to be too close to the men. She leads the men on hunts, so she's keeping a very close eye on the men and leaving the women in charge of the town. And the men are starting to notice. But they're all very confused about this because their wives are happy and the town seems to be prospering. So what is there to complain about? Ashitaka comes in, he sees everything that's going on, the subtle wrongness of Irontown, and he can see as an outsider with eyes unclouded. And then later it is clarified, or it is expanded upon, I should say, as eyes unclouded by hatred. Eyes unclouded by hate. And you learn that Irontown has been at constant war with the spirits of the forest, which Lady Eboshi is trying to wipe out. And leading the charge against Irontown is Princess Mononoke-san, the princess of the forest beasts, or forest spirits, who has been raised by the wolf spirits and sees herself as a beast and has been trying to kill Lady Eboshi because Lady Eboshi has actually succeeded in nearly wiping out the wolf tribe. And she wants to kill the god of the forest in order to expand Irontown. She also is, like, there are so many subtle moments in this movie. Like, people who think the film is feminist, like, this is what I mean when I go, I don't really agree. There is a great moment later in the movie where the men are out fighting and the women are left back home, and she tells the women, to be careful, and she says, you can't trust men. She tells them this while she is actively lying to the men, misleading them about what she is doing. That's the subtext of the scene. The subtext of the scene, she says men are untrustworthy while she is actively lying to them. Right? Like, this is not meant for, you're not supposed to take what she's saying here at face value. If you are, you're missing the point. The entire movie is like, there's so many layers here to the movie as Ashitaka attempts to figure out how to unite them. Like, the forest spirits are not all correct. They're blinded by hatred as well. They're blinded by rage. One thing you learn at the end of the movie is that Lady Eboshi is willing to negotiate. Like, sure, it took a lot to get her to that point, but she's willing to do it. What does that tell you? Probably nobody ever tried. Yet nobody ever tried, despite the fact that there is a human who's living among the forest spirits. San should be the perfect person to bring reconciliation between the two groups, and she doesn't even attempt it, right? She doesn't even try to do it. And until Ashitaka comes in and forces it. And then there is a question here of, like, I always wondered, this was the first few times watching the film, what the Emperor's place in this movie was. Because the Emperor sends in an army of samurai to kill anyone, and you learn that the Emperor is searching for a way to live forever. That's why he wants the power of the forest spirit, and he's willing to kill anyone to get there. And then I thought about it, and I realized that the Emperor's motivation was exactly the same as everyone else's motivation. All of them want the same thing, to not die, right? No matter what it takes, even if it means causing suffering for other groups, even if it means disrupting the balance of life or whatever, all of them want the same thing. They want protection for themselves and their own, right? And to not die. The Emperor wants to not die, Lady Eboshi wants to not die, the forest spirits want to not die, and all of them are willing to cause other people to suffer and die if it means they can get what they want.
Yep.
Now, that doesn't mean they're all morally equivalent, but their ultimate motivations are all exactly the same. That's why when Ashitaka brings it to a conclusion, the conclusion isn't like outwardly, it's not superversive in the sense that everything ends happily and there's no problems anymore. But it is superversive in the sense that Ashitaka has prevented the worst possible outcome from befalling everybody, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
the worst possible outcome has been avoided, and the main players are willing to work together to forge a better future with Ashitaka in the middle. And this is something every time I watch this movie, I get more out of it. It just improves and improves. There's so much depth to this film. Like it really is. This is my recommendation to people who saw it and did not like it or did not get it is rewatch it. Like seriously, rewatch it because there's a lot of it is a lot of it can only really be understood on multiple viewings as you analyze it and you're paying attention to different things. It needs to be viewed multiple times. Miyazaki is probably my favorite director, and I this is my favorite of his films. So there you go. Go ahead, Ben. What is your number one movie of all time?
My number one movie of all time, a movie I can sit down and watch and not worry about a thing. Why? That is Atlantis: The Lost Empire.
Ooh,
Uh,
interesting.
it is one of my favorite movies. I actively seek it out after certain points. I view it as sort of the adventure film. You have similar movies like Stargate, the original Stargate movie, The Mummy, and other things like that, where you have an adventurer or somebody who wishes they were an adventurer finding lost information that they can use to uh, find the truth of the matter, kind of like Henry Schliemann and the ruins of Troy. I miss him every day, bros. Uh, he dynamited the way into my heart, just like the Trojan treasure chamber. um, I love, where they go on an adventure with a kooky and wacky bunch of characters, fight against different people, and sort of come out the day richer, and usually staying behind with, the people that they were helping. Milo does it. What's the character in Daniel Jackson does it in Stargate. Milo does it in Atlantis: The Lost Empire. Kira's, of course, an absolute a babe, a smoke show even. Um, and it just portrays very well. There's a moral character to Milo that I find fascinating, where he probably would be fairly atheistic, knowing the time and place that he's in, but at the same time, he has a very strong moral core. Uh, you have the mercenaries who act as mercenaries, but at the same time, they themselves have their own morality to it that they follow carefully. Even the Frenchman, disgustingly. Then you have the villain Rourke, which the dumbest take I've seen in a while is Disney's forgotten twist villain, and it's Rourke. And it's like he was a villain from the beginning. It's implied that he murdered Milo's grandfather, or at least took part in his death and taking of the stuff. Like it's frustrating. Uh, and it's another one of those movies that like had this great idea, these high-minded, animation ideas that just kind of flopped. Like this should have been, part of the start of a great deal of adventure films, and it kind of was. But at the same time, in the end, it just came to nothing for reasons I simply don't understand. Atlantis: The Lost Empire is great. It's a perfect movie. It has everything. Maybe you could say, oh, well, it doesn't, even song and dance is like, no, 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 just for what it is. It's the perfect movie. The characters are perfect. The villains are perfect. The final fight is great. The villain dies in a very satisfying way. There's plenty of eye candy. There's plenty of, reasonable actions that are taken. The adventure's prime grade. Like, it's one of those things where I don't have a flaw for it. I don't even have a pretend flaw for it. Like I don't even want to pretend that there's a flaw for it. I don't even want to pathologically lie about there's being a flaw. There's nothing there. There's no flaws. It's a perfect movie. And the fact that it wasn't as successful as it should have been. Um, the fact that it wasn't as successful as it should have been is a travesty. And quite frankly, I think that part of the reason why we have such problems with movies these days is because things like the Marvel movies did blow up out of proportion, but also that movies like Atlantis: The Lost Empire, Titan AE, Treasure Planet fell apart in the movie theater and were never as successful as they needed to be. Uh, yeah, that's it. That's it. It's a perfect movie. It's great. I love every second of it. I love the characters. Uh, you know, the it's just great. That's all I got, Anthony.
I saw it years ago. I remember it fondly. So, my number one film. So it is worth noting before I say this that on this list, I came up with the top 10 order literally like as we were discussing things at the beginning. This was not number one for Jaws has been number one at various points. Princess Mononoke probably would have been number one at certain points. It's but my number one movie as of right now is It's a Wonderful Life. It's a Wonderful Life has always been in my top five. That and it more than earns its number one spot. It's a masterpiece. Interestingly, of all of the movies on this list, it probably has the single least memorable soundtrack of all of them, which is kind of funny. But nevertheless, I consider this, as we mentioned with it, this is a flawless movie. Uh, there's really nothing in it that I would change at all. It is beautifully written, beautifully acted. There's really not much to it, but what I appreciate about this movie is, once again, like with a lot of the other movies I have on this, like it is so much deeper and more meaningful than I think people recognize. Like, one thing that always bothers me is people who say that It's a Wonderful Life is, a little overly saccharine. It's a little, oh, it's a very sentimental movie. To which my response is like, are we even watching the same movie? I don't understand how you could say that. Like, there is nothing sentimental about It's a Wonderful Life at all. If anything, it's very anti-sentimental. It's a Wonderful Life is a brutally honest film. It is honest about the sacrifices that you need to make to be a good person, to live a good life, right? And not good as in a life that you want, but good as in worthwhile, right?
Mm-hmm.
A life that is worth something. Uh, there is a scene where George, his brother has come home with a wife, and George has just learned that once again he has a chance of leaving town snatched away from him because his brother is going to get a job out of town. So once again, he believes he's going to leave Bedford Falls, and he's not. And he wanders, however, his mother sees that he's not having. He goes, "Why don't you go and court Mary?" And Mary, of course, is the love interest. He had shown interest in her a year earlier, I believe, like a few years, I think, at that point, a few years earlier, right?
Mm-hmm.
But Mary is seeing an out of town businessman named Sam Wainwright, who we learn, by the way, is cheating on her. Not that you could be too unsympathetic to him, since Mary is about to cheat on him, which is kind of funny. But anyway, George wanders down to Mary's house, and he goes in, and he's being intentionally very standoffish. And it's played for laughs at first, then gets very serious later. Like, the laughs that George is standing on, because obviously he's interested in Mary, and Mary is interested in him. She tries to play Buffalo Girls, which was a song that they had played on their first date, right? Uh, to try and get George interested, and George is intentionally pretending he's not interested while entering Mary's house. All played as kind of a joke. And then
I
Mary
never
gets
understood that he was pretending
that he wasn't interested. Well, why else does he enter her house?
because he was conflicted and he wanted to see what
Oh,
would
yeah.
happen.
No. Don't get me wrong. I don't mean pretending like he was actively lying about not being. But you're right. Like, he's conflicted. I think that's probably a better way to put it. Uh, I'll concede that point. Yeah. conflicted is probably a better way to put it. So he enters the house, and she gets a call from Sam Wainwright. And Mary, at this point, is very frustrated because George is clearly intentionally fighting himself and trying to act uninterested in Mary. And Mary wants him to be interested in her. And he's not biting. And she gets this call from Sam Wainwright, who says, "Oh, hey, George is there. Put him on the line." And George is offered the chance of a lifetime to leave town and become rich, right? Which is all he's ever wanted. And on the other side, standing in the way of this, is Mary. And this is where the scene drops the humor and gets very serious. And it's one of my favorite scenes ever. He grabs Mary and says, and George goes like, "You listen to me. This isn't what this isn't what I wanted. I don't want to get married. I don't want to do any of this." And then Mary is crying and saying his name, and then he kisses her.
Great scene.
Because what was that?
Great scene. I love it.
Yeah, absolutely a great scene. The genius of the scene, though, is that George is making a real sacrifice. He didn't win Mary, right? Like, he did, but in order to win Mary, he had to give something up that would have legitimately been a great opportunity for him, right? He would have gotten everything he wanted, and he chooses domestic life in a small town. And it's like, for Capra, this is worth it. But you can't forget that it's a sacrifice, right? Like, this domestic life that George is living is not an idyllic life. It's a worthy life. It's a good life, right? It's a life that any man should be proud of living. But make no mistake, it is not a life that is free of suffering. It is not a life that is going to just, everything's going to be roses. And that's why George is going to commit suicide. He's going to commit suicide because he believes it would be better if he wasn't born. Right? Like, think about what they're saying there. That's unbelievably dark. And one of the genius things about the film, too, is just how well Lionel Barrymore's Mr. Potter, he's the villain, and George parallel each other. Both of them are trapped, right? That's why Lionel Barrymore, who is in a wheelchair, represents a sort of physical trap, right? But Lionel Barrymore, he is described as a spider who is centered in the middle of Bedford Falls, trying to get his hands on trying to cast his webs onto everything. And George, the only honest man who is trying to oppose him, right? And he says later, when George begs him for money, because if he doesn't get this money, he will go to jail, right? Mr. Potter refers to George as he says, "You once called me a warped, frustrated old man. What are you but a warped, frustrated young man?" And he's right. Like, he is completely right about his description of George. Because George admits it. He admits it a few times. He is very frustrated about being trapped in Bedford Falls. In a sense, him and Potter have always wanted the same things, right? Potter wants power. Potter wants control of the town. He wants to be rich. George also wants to be rich. He also wants to be known for being a great man who does great things, right? Both of them are trapped in Bedford Falls. So what's the difference between the two? Well, the difference between the two is that ultimately George had the integrity and the wisdom to realize that there are more important things, and that's what he was going to focus on. He had the selflessness to realize that a life of self-sacrifice might be more difficult, but it's also it's better, right? From a moral perspective, from a perspective of right and wrong, right? George realizes this, Mr. Potter does not. And then what this ultimately amounts to is that in the end, George, by cultivating a life of virtue, has created a sort of wealth that of friends, right? That's what they say. No man is a failure who has friends. He's cultivated a wealth in virtue that Mr. Potter will never have and can't even understand, right? He can't even understand. This is why I've always actually kind of liked the fact that we never see Mr. Potter get his comeuppance, right? Because you already did, right?
Yeah,
Mr. Potter is never going to have a moment in his life where people will flood into his home because they hear he is in trouble and donate half their life savings to help him, right? That will
right.
never happen for him. That will only happen for a man like George because of the decisions and sacrifices that George made in his life. And it's not something that's going to manifest itself in obvious ways like Mr. Potter's wealth will. But in moments that truly matter, in moments of real crisis, George is always going to be the richer man.
Yep.
And that's why it's a perfect movie. I could rewatch it over and over. It has transcended its status as a Christmas movie to me. Like to me, the idea of like what's the best Christmas movie, I almost consider like why are we even talking about this? It's a Wonderful Life, and by far, uh, there's really nothing else that's close. Now, I get it. I love Die Hard, and in many ways, it is the perfectly made action movie and deserves its reputation. I also, sorry people, I don't consider Die Hard a Christmas movie because thematically, it in no way resembles. It in no way resembles it.
Right.
Uh, that said, I like the movie. Like this doesn't
It's
really
fun.
matter.
Yeah.
It's a good movie. Uh, Miracle on 34th Street, I also enjoy as far as Christmas movies go. It is a good movie in its own right, but it's simply not on the same level. Yeah, it's just not. It's a good movie. I enjoy watching it. It's not on the same level. Elf has a few good jokes. It's overrated. There, I said it. I like maybe four scenes in Elf.
You know
Other
what
scenes
my
are
favorite
cringe.
Christmas movie is?
Cringe. Cringe, man. I'm
How
gonna
the
say
Grinch
Elf.
Stole Christmas, the Jim
Yeah, that
Carrey
movie.
version.
I'm sorry, that's terrible. I hate that movie.
I love that movie. It's
The
great.
original Grinch I like, the short version with but that was animated by what's his name, Chuck something.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know who I'm
Chuck
talking about.
Jones.
Yeah, thank you, Chuck Jones. The Chuck Jones Grinch I like, the Jim Carrey Grinch. Uh, Elf is cringe. There, I said it. It has like three or four good scenes.
The Peter
Don't get me
Dinklage
wrong.
scene.
Yeah, exact. That's what I was gonna say. The Dinklage scene is a masterpiece, and in many ways justifies the existence of the entire movie.
And
Uh,
Peter Dinklage.
yes. And Peter Dinklage. But the final scenes where like they have to get Santa running, those are terrible. I'm sorry, they're terrible
Yeah.
scenes. Uh, Home Alone, I think is fine. I don't hate it. I don't love it. By far, the best moments in Home Alone are the ones with the robbers. They're very funny.
Yep.
Uh, Otherwise, I think the movie's just kind of okay. Miracle on 34th Street, I think, is the clear second best. A Christmas Story is fine. It's okay. But Miracle
So
on 34th Street, I think, is the clear second best, but
I
it's
will
just not as deep.
I will never enjoy A Christmas Story, partially because I just hate it and I hate the box art with that creepy kid on the front, but also because the saddest girl I ever dated was watching that movie in October and I still can't get over it. Like she watched it on repeat.
That is very funny. Uh,
I was like,
okay,
mm,
but yeah, it's a Wonderful Life, though. It has to me, it transcends its status as a holiday movie. It is just a masterpiece of characterization, of writing, of theming. It is brutally honest in the way it presents things. But it never loses. In many ways, it is the most subversive film ever made
mm,
because it has a certain honesty about life that it presents, where it shows you the glory and the beauty of it without hiding the pain and the sadness of it. It
mm,
shows it all and comes out on the side of the angels.
yes,
And I think that's a good place to end it.
it does. It reminds me of the verse, it rains on what is it? It rains on the just and the unjust.
Yes.
And I've always felt that that's always been appropriate. And It's a Wonderful Life is a truly great movie. It's not something I seek out. I don't necessarily enjoy it, but it's a worthy first place. There are movies that are worth, putting on lists and stuff like that. In the top 10, this is purely for my enjoyment, my diletto or whatever it's called, my delight. If you were to say, Ben, justify Sucker Punch as a truly great movie of all time, I'd start laughing. It doesn't exist, yeah, as a truly great movie. But movies like Van Helsing, The Mummy, and especially movies like It's a Wonderful Life, and Atlantis: The Lost Empire, and others with heroism, with true, Christian ideas in them, with a representation of Christ, not like Aslan, but in the sense of the morals and the self-sacrifice of the heroes and the characters. Truly make the things greater than what they could be. Um, anyway, thank you, Anthony, for sharing this with me. Next week we'll have something more serious. Uh, have a good night, everyone, and I hope you join us next week.
Ooh,